Settle in. This is a quiet evening walk through Scandinavia. The dark timber of a stave church with carved doorposts that fit like joined hands, long fish racks on a wine-cooled shore, where cod dries to light boards, a tar-scented rope walk, where hemp learns its twist, a small mail boat threading a narrow fjord under a patient sky, and a water-driven sawmill that keeps steady time with wheel and gate. Well, moves slowly, no arguments, no loud music, no sudden cuts, just a level voice and low, even sound. If sleep arrives, that's the plan. When you wake, the story will be right where you left it. The first part. Sea air reaches the valley in a thin, clean ribbon. A timber yard lies just above the river bend, level as a table someone cared about. Piles of pines stand in rank straight trunks. Heartwood turned to the north, so the sun won't talk them into checking. A stone ring for fire sits off to one side. Above it hangs a black kettle with a lip like a thumbprint. When the wind draws through the spruces, it smells of resin and cold iron. Not a festival, just work arranged so that hands find what they need without asking. We start where a building begins and ends, with the line the ground offers. A sill is a beam that carries a wall. Four of them make a rectangle that will keep its shape through weather and men's habits. The carpenters chalk a string, snap it against level pegs, and bring the first sill to the marks. Scarves, long splices that make one beam from two are cut with patience, and a low angle plane that leaves a soft stripe of light behind it. The scarves, keys, small oak blocks driven home, sit proud for now. Then flush after the mallet has said what it came to say. A stave church takes its name from staves, the upright posts, so the sills must be true, or the rest will learn crooked speech. Tools lie where tools like to lie. The adze lives edge down on a chip bed. The auger's T-handle keeps its shadow short. The froze blade leans in a wooden fork, so no foot will meet it by mistake. A froze splits, not cuts. The mallet tells it how hard to remember. Tree nails wooden pegs wait in a tub of water, so they will swell when asked to keep to pieces honest. When the foreman says mark, a boy sets a race knife along the scribe line and closes a loop around yesterday's decision. The knife leaves a pale, thin valley in the pine. The saw will follow that valley later, like water follows a road. We are on the sill, at the southwest corner. The first stave stands in its shoe, a mortise sunk deep enough to be sure, not so deep the foot will drown. Two men with oak levers lift the post, while a third places a wedge under the tenon. A fourth looks along the line and nods, only when the spirit levels bubble forgives the last breath. A braced emperor comes home with two lashes and a pin. No shouting, voices run low enough to save the morning for the afternoon. A stave is just a post, until the second and the third and the fourth stand with it and decide to become a frame. A pot nearby warms the day. Pine tar thick, black, clean with the clean of long heat begins to loosen in the kettle. A tar kettle is a simple promise, resin boiled out of pine roots and stumps, until it becomes a weather that wood prefers. A man with a ladle stirs, the surface blinks, he thins a dip with a splash of turpentine. Only when air is to call for flow, he says nothing to the fire that the fire doesn't already know. Brushes live in a coopering bucket, whose rim learned to be round long before today. When the first stave's foot is trimmed, the brush gives it a coat that shines like a raven's wing. Tar sinks, darkens, and forgets rain. Long after the brush's handles have learned other hands, that black will still be talking quietly to water. Inside the yard, shingles are born, a bolt of straight-grained pine short. Square meets the fro and a club it yields clean shakes, thin as a tongue and twice as honest. Each shake is a small lesson in patience, split, then dressed with a draw knife to a taper that gives roofs their habit of shedding trouble. A boy stacks them by 10s and 20s. He learns to keep the heartwood edge to the weather and the bark edge under cover. Later, men will climb a ladder and lay them from eave to ridge with a lap that knows how much is enough and how much is brag. Tar will dress the ridge last. The ridge always gets the last quiet word. We are under the west gable, near the door where hands will pass for a century. Two carvers sit against a beam with their knives in com work. The doorposts make a soft, climbing braid dragons that look more like wind than like threat. Leaves that remember the way pine smells When sun finally bothers to kiss a board, the carver's knives don't chatter. The coals fall like fish scales and go to a basket. And the basket is a stove's afternoon and a pot's good temper. A carved door does not guard against rain or men. It guards against days becoming ordinary by mistake. When the staves are up, wall planks slide between them from sill to plate standing boards with tongues and grooves, thick enough to keep out weather, thin enough to be lifted by one back without speeches. A plank sits shy, the carpenter lifts a wooden beetle, gives to measured blows, and the tongue finds its neighbour. The seam disappears as if the boards had always meant to be one another's company. At the corner, a scarf sill accepts a bracket that will host the dragon for the eaves. The bracket looks light, but wears its load easily. The math is older than books in this valley and lives in what men learned by watching when roofs failed, and then when they didn't. You can let your attention drift to the river. The frame will continue to find its square, the tar will keep it slow. Black sentence, the adze will knock a rhythm that doesn't ask to be admired. The day does not depend on you, it prefers your company. An hour, and the gallery posts stand. These are the small columns that hold the aisle roof. They sit on stone pads because water respects stone when invited politely. Each foot gets 2 coats of tar before it meets its stone. Each head gets a measuring stick laid against it, so the plate above will hold level. An auger gives a round hole a reason, and a tree nail with a shaved point goes in, oiled with linseed, so it will mind its path without tearing the wood. A mallet persuades. The peg swells as it dries and turns from guest to citizen. The bell coat beam comes next, not the bell. Bells wait. First there is a seat for weight and a way for weight to talk to ground. The beam is wide, its cheeks are braced, its joinery isn't fancy and isn't shy. A man climbs into the rafters with a little plane, sets a shaving on his tongue out of habit and cheer, and checks that the ridge board meets each rafter foot with no daylight between. A ridge that keeps its shadow is a ridge that keeps its weather, the old man says, and the boy repeats the line to himself later as if learning a song. We move to the tar kettle again because the kettle governs the weather of the work. A second man stirs. Tar sings in a small voice where a bubble finds a lip. It is not a loud job, but it is a job you not do. Brush follows brush, sill faces, lower posts, end grain on every peg. A rope hemp from last year's rope walk by the bay gets passed through a warm ladle and comes out shining. It will become the bell's first lanyard, gentle on the hand and not quick to rot when fog comes nosing in from the fjord. Rope remembers tar the way men remember the names of streams. We are in the half-light under the rising roof. 2 men lay sheathing wide boards across rafters. The boards talk, a small creak when a knot comes under a nail, a soft forgiveness when the hammer checks itself and corrects the angle. A sack of iron nails sits near the eave, expensive, counted. Most fastenings today are wood to wood, but a roof earns a fistful of iron where wine tries its tricks. A boy snips shingle lath to length with a small, old saw whose teeth humour the day, and he hangs the saw back on its peg with the handle toward the next hand. You may nod. The roof will not take offence. The shingles will go up the ridge, will wait. The tar will keep its slow attention over a flame that has been told to be reasonable. Across the yard, a small lamp glows where a scribe incisors a pattern on a plank for the choir screen. The lamp is fish oil cod, oil burning from a shallow boat of iron with a wick that was a piece of linen once loved by someone's mother. The light is thin and gentle. It does not bully edges or promise drama. It lets the scribe see the knife point and the little pencil of pitch on the wood. He writes the curve with a compass like to fingers and a pin. One quiet circle will live 100 winters if nobody forgets to keep the roof honest. By midday, the first dark strip of shingle reaches the eave. A man lays a line and another one half a shingle higher, so laps repeat without thinking. He starts one course with a half piece to stagger the joints. The pattern reads itself as it grows. When the line meets the valley where two roofs shake hands, a strip of tarred cloth bridges beneath the shakes. The cloth looks like the wrong thing until the next squall, when it becomes the right thing, which is what most right things look like before storms. We are at the threshold now, where a ring latch will live. The smith from the next farm has arrived with a small bundle, a latch shaped with a forge that knows the difference between bright heat and foolish heat, a hinge strap with 3 nails, and a curl at the end that is only as pretty. A strength allows a hasp with a fork for a pin, so a cord can close the door at the end of a service, the way snow closes a track overnight. He lays each on a board and looks at the door. The wood and the iron nod to each other in a language both speak well. When evening thinks of coming, the foreman stands back at the south fence and counts not boards or pegs, but decisions. Sills seated, corners true, posts tarred to the height water respects, shingles in order, bellcote beam fast. He runs a thumb along a brace and finds the arris neither knife sharp nor dull, just the kind that does not bruise or invite mold. He moves a bucket under the eave where tomorrow's rain might test the drippling. He kicks a chip pile with his boot to send the smell of resin back into the air where it belongs. Then he writes in a little book a sentence too plain to impress anyone and too useful to forget. Frame stood tar on feet roof, begun door cut no faults of note. If a nap finds you now, let it. The pitch in the kettle will go on breathing, the posts will go on standing, the rope for the bell will finish drinking its tar and dry to a quiet shine. Nothing here requires a witness to keep its promise. Night brings along approving chill. The kettle lid sits straight, the last cinders glow under ash. Men hang tools where tools go, augers in their box with wooden mouths facing down, adze edges padded with a rag. The throw blade slipped under a board, so it won't advertise itself defeat in the grey before dawn. A small lantern rides home in a coat's crook, it leaves a thin, warm smell you will find again later if you go to the door of a house where bread has been, where fish has been, where someone combed work out of wool under a peg. Days will stack, they always do in places like this. Shingles up, ridge tarred, portal hung, nave boarded, beams carved with a little line of stars, because nights asked to be remembered in wood as much as in sky. Then smoke from a little iron bowl will write its lines up the nave when winter throws its shoulder against the wall. Women will hear words inside while rain argues politely with tar outside. A child will touch a ring latch made by a man whose name is not on any stone and still get an honest lesson in how iron keeps its shape when the hand keeps its promises. The second part. The harbour is a bowl of pale water, winter soft and clean as a pane. Along the shore, tall frames stand in ranks, the heel poles on poles, crossbars making a lattice that looks like scaffolding for a cloud. Underfoot, round stones that have learned to keep their balance, a run of kelp wood chips that tell the same story in different sizes. The wind moves off the sea with a salt that does not bite, it has work to do and prefers to do it quietly. A shed door stands open. Steam makes a short flag above a kettle where a coil of twine is learning to be looser in the hands that will need it. Inside the shed, the morning begins with knives. A plank bench, hose of sea water draped to a nail, buckets squared against a wall. Cod lies into neat rows head to tail to head, so the reach is short and the rhythm holds. A man takes one in his left hand, lays the belly to him, and sends the blade up from vent to throat in one even pull. He turns the wrist and lifts the head free at the collar, not a chop. A hinge turned and sets the skull to the left in a crate that will go to the oil press later. The knife rides along the spine and opens the fish like a book the sea wrote, leaving backbone still attached to one side. Another hand teases the spine loose from flesh with a short flat hook, a flick of the thumb, the kidney line, a rinse of seawater, makes the red go grey, and then gone. The fish becomes a butterfly on the plank, split cod, clean, white, no drama. A salt tub sits under a hook. Coarse crystals flow from a sack like dry snow. The man sets a layer of split fish, salt, another layer, salt again, until the tub holds its share. The tub does not shout its numbers, 3 hours for small fish in clear weather, 5 for big ones. The night if the wind has another plan. A woman lifts the tub end, listens to the slide, decides a little more will be enough. She marks the board with chalk next to the tub's handle. Chalk is the only clock needed just now. If you let your focus slide along the beam of the shed and out the door to the racks, the tubs will still count by chalk. The knife will still find the spine without argument. and the bucket will still be where it was left when a hand reaches without looking. At the rack, two men work with the same rope and to different jobs. The first has loops of twine over his arm, the second carries a basket of wet, salted fish. They stand on a low trestle and throw pairs of fishtail to tail over the crossbar, so the split sides hang like pages drying. The first man ties the tails with a square knot that will learn to tighten, but still forgive fingers in spring. He does not watch his hands, he looks at the spacing on the bar, at the distance to the next pole, at the wind. The wind is the senior man here. It tells knots when to behave and fish when to learn to be stockfish, the dry staple that travels farther than the boats that raised it. A boy at ground works the buckets back to the shed. His boots know which stones will rock and which will keep promises. He stops at the kettle and pulls the twine through warm water where a little soap helps stiffness surrender. He leaves the coil on a peg and tips a nod to the cat who has taken a morning interest in everything and will nap when interest becomes impolite. The racks hold an alphabet of weather. On a dry day, the cod stiffen and pale oil flecks bloom along edges and then disappear as skin learns to glimmer like a dry leaf. On a damp day, wind chooses the work and men listen. Faces turn into the breeze and measure with cheeks. Good a touch slower, but not wrong. If a weight of weather is coming, the foreman takes a pole with a hook and lifts whole runs down to lie under canvas until the air remembers its obligations. Canvas is not for show, just a dark with a rope along the edge, stone on each corner, a way to say tarry a day and be none the worse. Toward noon, grading begins for yesterday's work. A scale hangs from a beam, the hook polished where iron and fish talk. The grader lifts a dried pear in one hand, sets the hook through the tied tails and touches the beam. Numbers are less important than feel. Weight in the palm, stiffness at the side sound when the spine taps a knuckle wooden, not wet. He sorts to 3 heaps, first quality for the far market, second for the nearer boats, thirds for home, where stew forgives and salt teaches thrift. He writes in a book that cares for one thing: how much in each, by day, by wind, by moon. If your eyes close for a minute and open to the sound of a gull working at a shell, nothing at the rack will have gone astray. The ropes will keep their hold, the crossbars will keep their even line, the wind will go on being older than all of us. Afternoon brings the long walk with bundles to the storehouse. A woman carries a sheaf of stockfish against her apron and steps sideways through the door, as if she remembered to be kind to the doorway. Inside, slatted shelves run in roads the air can use. Each bundle lays tails out, heads in. A pattern learned the first winter, a roof kept out snow well enough to brag. A ledger book with a blue cord sits on a nail, each bundle gets a tally mark beside the family's name. Numbers rise over months, like a hillside that never seemed steep while you were walking it, and looks like a dignified climb after. Back by the shore, a cooper checks a barrel heading for oil. Head hoops sit loose so the head can come out and go in again without teaching the staves any bad habits. The head comes, the barrel leans, cod heads slide in, and the lid returns to keep the smell a neighbor, not a stranger. The heads will see the press next iron screw, heavy plate, slow descent lamps, and soap owe their richest light to this latent part of the fish. Waste rarely announces itself as waste in places where winters still keep notebooks. A rope walk runs along the back of the harbour, roof high on one end and open on the other. It is a barn of air and patience. Hemp hangs in bunches like unfinished hair. To men, a boy, and a frame with hooks turn 3 strands into a rope with a twist that makes sense to palms. The boy walks backward with a light reel, feeding fibre at a rate the hooks approve of. A tar pot lives here too, not as thick as the church tar, thin to a soak that darkens rope the colour of a wet plank and keeps weather from chewing. Rope hangs at the end like a long, finished sentence waiting for its place in a paragraph boat. Rack, mast, dock, choice made by need, not by pride. Gentle note for drifting. If sleep presses down a moment, the rope will still take its twist, the hooks will still turn, and the tar will still keep its small promise to fibre and time. Late day. The boat returns from the outer seam of islands with more fish. The crew lines the catch along the gunnel, the pattern they learned without counting. Good knives like good rules, handle to blade, edge out, no surprise. The sternman's palm lands on the cold, remembered shape of the first fish, and his thumb rests a second on the place where we began this morning. The work is a circle or a spiral depending on whether you are tired or rested. Either way it completes itself. Fog sometimes thinks about staying. The rack watches it make up its mind. If fog enters and lingers, men shift to the lower bars closer to ground, where adrift from the shed doors and a very rational wind from the hill make a passage the fog respects. The cat remains on the windowsill, unconcerned by meteorology. A bell on a porch 100 meters away keeps 3 notes of the hour and goes about its other business. The day shortens with the kind of certainty rope crews and fish crews cultivate in themselves. When the night sets its foot on the headland, the last job is the simplest. A man walks the lower line of the rack with his hand out and his eyes half closed. He tests ties with 3 fingers and no show. He pushes a pair over a bar where it had shifted its mind. He listens for the small sound a loose knot makes and corrects it. He reaches in his pocket and uses a sliver of wood to wedge a dry pole where it thought of turning. He does not think about what the wind will do at 2 in the morning. He gives it a fair partner to work with and goes home. In the kitchen, the pieces that did not go to the rack go to the pot. Heads to press collars to stew a scrap to the pan for the child who came in late and learned there was always 1 slice left if he did not ask and did not make noise. Bread comes from the shelf in a cloth. Butter from underwater in a jar. The knife knows the amount because hands do. A woman tightens a line of string that holds drying mittens above the stove. She squeezes one and smiles because the mitten tells the truth. The storehouse, last. A lock that prefers to close with a slow hand takes its turn. The clerk's ledger accepts the day's end page, line, 2 numbers, 1 word, fair. He closes the book and leaves it on the nail. A book on a table in a damp room is a book that will learn to curl. He lifts the lamp, touches the wick, and pinches the light out between 2 fingertips damped on the tongue without looking at them. Habit does that, not show. He steps into the street and the wind, pleased with the help, finishes what the day began. You can drift now if you want. In the racks, wire holds, wood holds, rope holds, fish holds air. The sea gives and takes, and tonight is one of its gentler evenings. Men will wake before the wind has many fresh thoughts. Knives will rest in their place. The chalk line on the tub handle will remind the hands of morning what those hands created in the dark. The 3rd part. Morning at the boat shed tastes of salt and wood smoke. The shed mouths the water by way of a slip planks on poles. Seaweed combing the piles at half tide. Inside, the floor is clean where feet need it and ankle deep in shavings where the plane had a good night. Frames hang from pegs like patient antlers. A coil of copper clout nails sits in a wooden bowl. A kettle breathes on a low brazier because oak does not bend for free. A chalk line on the wall is yesterday's argument with a sheer plank next to it. A template in thin pine holds a curve the family trusts more than any voice. The kelson lies on its trestles, straight without stiffness, scarfed in the middle with a long, polite handshake. Stem and stern post rise from it. Rabbit cut for planks yet to arrive. A 5-ring dash for dash or dash will come from this timber. Not a throne or a sermon, only a boat that can hold weather by the sleeve and ask it to behave. The builder drags a baton along the stem with one hand and palpates the curve with the other. The baton reads the future. The palm remembers the past. He marks with a race knife where the first garboard plank will tuck. No deeper than necessary, no shallower than pride. Planks arrive as strake spruce for lightness, pine for strength where stones have opinions. Each strake is plain to a lap clinker, lap strake thin at the top, honest at the bottom. So each above rides the shoulder of the one below, a respectful neighbour. He offers the garboard up, block under, clamp on, wedge in. A brace and bit opens holes, along the lap copper nails go in, from outside inside. A boy holds a rover small square washer of copper against the nail, and the builder forms the rivet with a dolly and a cut-off, nipping the tail and peening it into a low, wide mushroom. Copper will not sulk in salt, it makes a marriage and keeps it. Steam is a separate language. The copper kettle on the brazier snorts once, then gets about its job. Oak ribstock thin, straight, long enough to ask a curve to be kind goes into a box above the kettle and learns to be flexible without forgetting who it is. When the builder judges by thumb and eye that the heats are spoken enough, he lifts a rib with mitts, threads it under the laps, and bends it to the frame with 10 men and 12 clamps no shouting. Only the music of iron and wood making an agreement. He lashes the heel temporarily with hemp, so the oak can cool in the shape the boat prefers. Caulking here is morse and tar, not cotton, and mallet mountain morse teased and dried, then pressed into seams with a narrow iron and a thumb that has learned the weight that keeps out water without teaching the seam to brag. Over the morse, a brush writes pine tar in a slow, black script. Tar tastes of woods and long fires and remembers other roofs and other boats. It is impartial. Outside, the mail boat shoulders in from the point low deck house forward. A little wheelhouse with 4 panes and a brass horn on a bracket. White letters on the bow that spell her duties without fuss. An old single-cylinder hot bulb chuffs under the deck with the regularity of a person who keeps promises. The engineer opens the petcock, wipes his hand on waist, and listens for the change in the exhaust when the prop meets bottom wash near the slip. To fenders round as cheese wheels hang just right and bump the piles with manners. The shed produces its day. A canvas mail sack with a rope sling, 2 crates of salted butter, a bundle of letters tied with blue, a parcel wrapped in wax paper and twine that will become lamp chimneys to a man on an island who keeps the light without fanfare. The skipper backs her a hand's breadth, then edges up with a touch of rudder and no words. A heaving line arcs, a turn around the cleat, and the mail sack comes aboard. The clerk from the little post hands over a ledger. The skipper signs with a pencil stub that would embarrass a city, but Ruddy here is embarrassed by the right tool being small. Back in the shed, the builder hangs the rib-bending mitts on their nail, where mitts prefer to wait. He checks the lap snail heads all in a straight, low line, no proud, no shy. He shoots a long shaving off the sheer strake with a plane set so fine, the shaving looks like a ribbon that kept a secret. The boy catches the ribbon because catching what a plane gives is a way of understanding a boat without any words about it. You can let attention settle like sawdust. For a minute, the kettle will still hold its steam. The copper will still fold true under the hammer. The ribs will cool without changing their mind when no one is watching. On the quay, the little coastal run begins the day's thread. The skipper gives to short on the horn for a blind corner under the cliff. An answering cluck from a bell buoy says, "Nobody intends to be foolish." He steers by marks that would not be marks to a stranger. A white dayboard with a black stripe lined up with a notch in the hill, a pair of birches that become one when you are near enough, the way the outfall from a brook makes a pale vein in calm water. The lead lives in the wheelhouse, and a canvas bag its line carries marks in cloth and leather, the old code, to strips 4 2 fathoms, leather with a hole 4 3, white rag 4 5. The lead's tallow pad keeps small stones for evidence when the skipper thinks he would like to hear bottom tell its own story. He doesn't use it today. The tide is right and the wind chooses to be social. First stop is a landing with a soprano bell and a ladder that knows the names of everyone who has learned to place a boot on its second rung instead of its first. The mate coils the spring line so it will uncoil without theatrics, drops it to a man who learned knots in the same room. The mate learned weather, and the boat breathes once against the fender and holds. 3 people step down. For a step up, a toddler looks at the horn with a respect that will do her good later, and the mail sack exchanges hands with the same seriousness it left with. The horn gives one short and the boat turns her shoulder to the next bit of water, as if it were furniture being slid across a floor you like. In the shed, the builder fits the thwart seats light, strong, removable. He carves the inside edge to a soft arris, so thighs won't learn rue from a long pull. He drills limber holes along the kelson, so water will remember where to go. He sets knees grown knees, crooks from roots, where the grain already knew what a knee wants and rivets them with copper, because copper holds its tongue where iron might complain. He rubs a little tallow on the oar pins, so they will turn without squeaking a neighbor awake. A woman arrives with a basket of spun wool and a question about the little tiller could it be carved with a handhold the way her grandfather's was, so when she rows stern first through a swell she can grab it without looking and without baptizing her sleeve. The builder nods and sets the tiller blank on the bench. He cuts a small hollow under, leaves a ridge 4 fingers, and sands the edge until it feels like a good decision. He will finish it with oil boiled with a pinch of pine rosin, never varnish in a boat that wants to be worked and not shown. Midday on the fjord. The mail boat threads and narrows between skerries. The pilot flag is not hoisted. The skipper needs no pilot for this reach, but he douses speed near a fish farm and lets the wake die to a low shrug. A small boom on the foredeck lifts a box of machine parts to a pier whose timbers have learned to groan without melodrama. He chalks a word on the box, because chalk is how men talk to tomorrow at sea level. A fog band sits on the outer water like wool on a chair. The skipper sets the bell to the schedule for reduced visibility, 1 prolonged each minute when underway. He cracks the wheelhouse door, so sound will find him. He hangs a second handline from the rail at the bow so a man can feel a rock story before the rock tries to act large. The horn speaks once with more depth, not more volume. The mate stands on the quarter, eyes and ears forward, hat brim doing less and the bones around his ears doing more. Sleep safe note. If you drift while the fog drifts, nothing on the route will mind. The bell will keep the count, the marks will meet as they should, and the man at the wheel will go on measuring distance by the whisper of wash on rock and the way the sound of the engine changes when water deepens. By afternoon, the shed grows a hole where morning had a frame. The fairings lines show themselves in light. A thing glows down the laps under the doorway sun, a shadow where the keel thinks about authority and then relaxes. The builder fits the breast hook, the big grown crook, under the stem and seats it with 2 bolts that know their holes better than a stranger could. He lays oars on trestles and planes, each blade thin enough to talk to water without shouting at it. The boy rubs oil into the loom of an oar until the grain lifts one last time, then falls back into itself. The mail boat returns through the slot with a small list of good done. A woman at the second landing holds a paper that tells the town doctor what he already guessed, and the doctor tells her what he would have told her without paper, and everyone agrees the paper helped anyway. A sack of flour goes ashore. Where flour goes, a crate of glass rides carefully to a house whose windows remembered winter too well and asked for new views. The engineer oils the rock arm through its little lid, wipes the paw with grease wool, and sets the lid back without force, because lids prefer being treated as if they can hear you. Toward evening, a norther sits down the fjord. The shed door gets its pin, the brazier banks, the kettle lid fits. The builder flips the hull in slings so its belly faces the day shear line, like a smile that knows a joke worth keeping. He chalks a straight along the keel and decides tomorrow the boat will meet the water. He writes with a carpenter's pencil on a scrap of pine the 3 things not to forget at the slip: plugs in, painter clear, oars aboard. In this place, lists are small and sufficient. Launch morning has its own handshake, to skids greased with tallow, a line on the stem to a post, men at the chine, a shout that is not even a shout, more a word. Now, in the tone people use when they lift a neighbor's half of a table. The hull goes down, checks itself on the painter, and decides to be a boat in the place boats do that deciding where wood meets water, and both admit they are better as friends. Tar on the laps does not scold the sea, it nods. The boat sits level and no one performs joy. They simply receive it. The mail boat noses in and the skipper holds her against the pile with a prop's polite thrust. He leans out the wheelhouse and says the word everyone wanted him to say: good. The builder passes him a small tar brush. There is always another seam somewhere, and the skipper passes him a mail sack bound for the head of the arm, where the carpenter's aunt writes letters on Sundays. Exchange done, both boats look as if they hadn't moved at all. Night remembers to arrive. The fairing is beached a moment to have her bottom learn a gravel it will know for 30 years. The mailboat slides out for the last reach. Horn set back to silence, bell quiet, only the engine breathing like a sleeping animal. Two lamps show at a cottage window, above the slip one in the pane. One on a table and the path between them is a person walking without hurry. The fjord makes a long curve to the sea, and then becomes a sky. If you need to drift here, drift. The rope will still be coiled. The letters will still be wrapped in blue. The oars will still know their sockets by heart when you open your eyes again. The fourth part. Mist rests on the mill pond like wool on a rail. The building squats low and long, timber walls tarred, where splash makes a habit. Roof of thin boards lap tight. A spillway murmurs under a footbridge above it. The headrace carries water in a dark, steady ribbon toward the wheelhouse. The wheel itself is half seen through planks, broad paddles around a rim, an iron shaft through a wall, old bolts that look as if they grew there. A hook pole leans against a post cant hook iron beak. Hickory handle waits in a rack. The air is at good smell made of sawdust and wet bark, and the ghost of pine sap heated by friction, until it thinks of honey. Out on the pond, the log boom holds a slow herd, Norway spruce, Scots pine, a few birch that wandered in, and will be sent to a different future. The boom timbers are chained nose to tail, oars for a giant who prefers never to lift his arms. Two men in boots with spikes stand on a boomstick and walk it without thinking. One taps a log with a pike to remind it not to learn the wrong current. The other nudges another log toward the slip where a chain hangs from a snatch block. Under winch waits with a light patience. The chain bites a log under the shoulder. The winch takes 3 turns around its drum, and the log rides toward the apron with the indifferent dignity of anything made by water and time. Inside the mill, everything is arranged around one bright, simple idea. The water wheel turns. Its shaft carries a wooden pitman arm pinned to a crank. The crank throws the pitman up and down. The pitman lifts and drops the saw frame at all, rectangular sash that holds a single blade. Each stroke is a sentence written in one word: up, down, up, down. Ahead of the blade rides the carriage, a timber sled on iron wheels, teeth called dogs set in a row to bite the log. Along the carriage runs a rack, and a pole linked to a cam on the main shaft. Every time the saw reaches the top or bottom, the cam nudges the pole. The pole advances the rack a measured tooth, and the log creeps into the blade the way a careful thought moves into speech. The sawyer checks the teeth with a small file, looking for any that forgot their length overnight. He sets the sets with a springy hand tool, bending alternate teeth a hair left, right, left, so the kerf will be wider than the blade, and wood will not learn to pinch. He runs a finger, light as breath, along the edge, and feels honesty more than sharpness. He's not looking for a razor. He's looking for agreement. He oils the sash guides with a bit of tallow on a rag. He looks at the water gate lever and the brake beam that sits on the wheel rim, and decides neither needs torque just yet. A log rides the apron and thumps into the cradle at the carriage's front. Bark wet, sapwood damp, heart a darker stripe. The tailman sets the dogs, iron points driven with a wooden mallet, just enough bite to keep the log's mind, while the iron does its duty. Wedges under the far side level the horn, so the grain will meet the blade without inventing waves. The sawyer sightlines the first cut slabbing off the round to find a plane and chalks a mark on the end with a carpenter's crayon fat from past winters in a pocket. Chalk is a trustworthy prophet here. Water now. The gate on the headrace answers the lever with a steady sigh. Boards lift along. Smooth pound presses the paddles. The wheel turns to its work with no ceremony. Inside the wall, cogs take hold. The pitman begins its steady climb, and bow the sash rises and falls in a rhythm a body can nap to. The pole ticks the rack, the carriage inches. The blade enters wood with a small, confident his sawdust falls in a thin, golden rain that drifts toward a pit, the way flour drifts toward a bowl. If your attention softens and slides to the window, where the mill pond shows a stripe of sky, the blade will keep its measure, the carriage will feed, and the pole will count without needing anyone to count along. The first slab comes free with a sigh, drops against the guides, and is taken by the off-bearer gloves, shoulders, Walk to a stack that will become firewood for people who like boards and warmth in the same winter. The second pass takes a board an inch thick to fingers of a man who has known boards longer than arithmetic. He checks thickness with calipers made of wood and habit the pole's tooth count agrees. He sets the next cut to 2 inches for planks. The mill does not care if it is boards or planks. The mill cares about a steady gait, a calm wrist, and not asking iron to think beyond its wages. The pitman's pins sing a small, oil-polished clack at each turn, the way a good clock answers gravity. The blade's teeth carry dust up and out, the gullets clearing the path like little cups pouring. The tailman watches the log's last inch before the end of the stroke, because that is where Wood sometimes remembers being a tree and tries to spring. He slips a thin wedge into the kerf at mid-length. Then another near the end. The wedges whisper to fibre. No need to seize, we can all be polite. Out on the pond, the spike men tease another log toward the apron. A splash of an aura gull that keeps its opinions to itself, for once a child in a red cap on the bank learning that logs are not chairs and water is never bored. Near the spillway, a rake catches chips and bark before they learn to travel. A woman with a rake of her own pulls the trap clean and sends the mess to a bed where it will rot into something that makes potatoes want to be noticed later. Back in the mill, the sawyer and the tailman trade places without saying. The new sawyer likes the gait a hair higher, more bite, same rhythm. He reaches to the chalk and writes today's date on the end of the log, because ends prefer truth. He takes the next slab thin to save the heart for the customer who asked for a beam that will not learn a twist when spring goes to summer. He adjusts the dogs with the mallet into quick, quiet blows, the second always lighter. The way good morning conversations are, stacks grow outside on stickers, thin strips laid between boards to let air use the space. The sticker man has his own strong opinions and keeps them in order. Stickers in line above stickers, so weight travels to ground. If it had planned its strip stacks roofed with 2 old planks and the stone, because rain respects roofs more than speeches. He chalks the end grain with a wash of lime, so the sun will think twice before taking moisture to fast. He steps back, sees lines straight as tide marks, and goes to find his mug, because pride is thirsty work if you let it sink in. Gentle note: if your eyes drop here, that's all right. The wheel will not hurry. The blade will sing the same even syllable. The dogs will hold, and the wedges will remember their places. The millwright arrives with a pouch of tools and the gossip of gears. He listens to the pitman block, top dead center, touches the bearing cap with the back of his fingers, and loosens a gibber hair because Wood swelled in the night and copied its mood to iron. He scrapes a hint of shiny from a guide where the sash asks too much and gets the fit back to a friendship. He lifts a belt 1 notch on a cone pulley to see if the feed will be kinder the next tooth. Yes. He nods and writes on a little card hung on a nail, a language of figures and arrows that would be nonsense to anyone else, but is a lullaby to him. A farmer enters with a sledge of small spruce. He needs rafters, not art 2x4s, and something stiffer where snow enjoys jokes. The sawyer marks with a scriber and flips the log so pith will sit near the center of boards where pith does least harm. He will box heart in one timber to make a strong spine and cut the rest free of the course so rings will stack like good years do. He explains none of this, he does it. The farmer watches and thinks about a roof that will go on without size. At midday, a pot comes from the stove next door, fish soup, potatoes, dill. Men sit on a stack end and eat with the same focus they bring to wedges. A spoon clinks enamel. Someone laughs once at a story that has learned how long it ought to be. A boy dog under the stack pretends not to listen, which is the only proper behavior for a dog that hopes 4 bones later. Afternoon brings river work. Upstream, a crew guides a loose drive down a riffle. Men with peavies stepping from log to log, cleats biting, poles pushing noses off rocks, short rope slings, and a cant dog to roll the stubborn piece until it learns to obey. A piker on the bank carries a coil of light line and watches for trouble where two currents disagree. If a jam threatens, the foreman looks for the key log, the one that chose to stand crosswise, like an opinion at a family table, and orders one cut. A saw bites, a wedge is set. The The jam thinks better of itself, and the whole crowd of timber remembers to be polite water again. They send a string to the pond. The boom man takes it with a hook. More work arrives at the mill's quiet throat. In the wheelhouse, Spray writes small commas on the wood. The brake man steps in and lowers the brake beam. Oak on wet iron. When a belt complains, or a dog slips, or a board shows more wave than any hand should forgive, the wheel slows, the sash hangs like a tall chair resting, and the mill turns into a room where voices use names again. The sawyer resets a guide. The tailman flicks out a wedge. The millwright rubs a spot with tallow, and the brake lifts as if it never learned what down meant. Motion resumes without drama. Toward the end of the day, the sawyer edges the board's trimming bark off both sides. He sets a fence along the carriage, feeds each board square to the blade, and lets edges fall to a pile destined for beams and kindling. He sets a few planks aside for a boat shop down the bay. Quarter sawn fir with rings standing straight, the kind that takes a nail like a friend and moves with the seasons like a modest house. He chalks boat on the ends with a flourish he was not aware of and would deny if accused. By the pond, a small crane lifts a log that will be too heavy later and not heavy enough now. The way many things are. A chain slides into place. The winch pays out. The log remembers to obey gravity. The men walk it with pikes to the carriage. It sits there like a winter, agreeing to reconsider. The sawyer arranges the first cut to give a true face for beams 8 by 8. Then 6 by 6 timbers that will be asked to become floors and posts, and the backs of cupboards where the kettles hum. He takes a short slab from the far side because the growth rings told him a story about stress, and he believes stories other people overlook. Evening light comes at the right low angle that turns sawdust into gold smoke. The sash keeps its metronome. The pull clicks. The rack agrees. The tailman has a motion he learned from the last man. Lift, turn, slide, set. It looks like ease because it paid for itself years ago in careful thought. A swallow arrives and decides the mill is a sky with walls and a roof that rains insects. It regards the sash as a river that never floods and approves. Between cuts, a boy sweeps the floor with a short broom, starting at the head of the carriage and drifting sawdust toward the pit. He uses the broom like a pencil, not like an oar. The broom's handle is cut shorter than a city broom. The boy does not wonder why. He simply moves in the space he has and leaves it kinder than he found it. He carries a tub of dust to a bin where someone will come later and take it to chickens who appreciate dust as much as numbers. If you float a moment here, you'll come back to find the same board leaning, the same wedge waiting, the same dust in its soft drift. The mill keeps time for itself and for anyone who wants to borrow a little. At shut, the gate slides, the wheel coasts, the brake lowers. The sash trembles once, like a tall tree after wind, and then stands. The last board of the day leans to join its fellows. The sawyer pulls the wedges from the kerf and puts them back in the small box where wedges live. He sets the dogs back 1 notch so the log will not think about waking. He wipes the saw with a rag that knows oil, not water, and hangs the file where files go. He chalks on a board end the tally for a man who asked for 12 of something and will find 13 because mills prefer to be remembered kindly. Outside, the sticker man lays the last line, roofs a stack, sprinkles a handful of fine sawdust over the top because fine sawdust tells rain how to behave. The pond goes from mirror to tin to velvet. A heron steps into the shallows with a patience that would shame a book. The boom men lay their pikes against the rail. Heel up, points down, because points down is how you keep points sharp and ankles safe. The foreman checks the wheel bearings with his palm warm, not hot. He taps the brake beam strap with a finger firm, not tight. He writes on a slate, wheel smooth, guides true, feed fine, wedges good. He leans the slate where morning will bend to pick it up and read. He closes the gate on the headrace with the humility of a man who has watched water remember old paths and prefers to ask politely that it forgets them. Night learns the mill by heart. Boards cool, weights settle into straightness, the rack relaxes. The pull sleeps with one tooth engaged because machines like to feel They are still part of the story, even when the lantern is out. The spillway keeps speaking. On the stack, an inchboard remembers the hand that lifted it and puts aside any thought of cupping out of spite. In a kitchen up the hill, someone brushes sawdust from a cuff and sets a kettle to hum. The same dust glows in lamplight and loses all interest in exactness. Another page of the day turns itself. Tomorrow will be like this and not like this. A different log, a different measure, the same wheel, the same fairness. Snow will come some months from now and make the pond's surface a sheet where men write their names with boots. Spring will arrive with its old news, bringing flood, and then flood's apology. And the wheel will take its green water again. Boards will leave to become sills and rafters and draw sides. A child will lay a cheek against one and smell the sun. The mill will not mind. It will prefer it. The fifth part. Forest edge at first light. A sprinkle of frost on bilberry leaves. The ground firms if it had remembered old iron under it. In the clearing, a charcoal clamp rises knee-high to a man and wide as a house room. Cords of split birch and pine stood on end in a tight round. The centre vent like a chimney. The skin laid in shingle fashion bark and turf overlapping. Seam over seam until the wood inside is a secret. A ladder of saplings leans against the cider rake. An iron bar and a shovel lie ready. Smoke lifts blue and thin where the keeper opened to hand-sized draughts at dawn. Charcoal is taught to be lighter and more patient. The teaching here is air, heat, and time arranged with manners. The keeper works with small gestures. He tests a scene with a finger for warmth. He touches the turf and feels where the damp from last night's dew has turned helpful or meddlesome. A boy stands with a brass sprinkling can and waits a patch, not to quench, to hush a prayer spoken in drops. The iron bar goes into a vent. He listens through his hand for the way it comes back. To quick means a gale inside. To slow means sulk. He shifts one vent to hands to the right and a palm down. Closes another with a twist of turf. And the smoke obliges by learning a softer grammar. In the small watch hut a low roof. A bench, there's a ledger with the day's mark. Third morning. Clamp no. 7. Wind north by east. Numbers are the way fire accepts advice. Around the clearing lie the wood billets in tidy cords. Bark in, heart out. Lengths that speak in one measure, so stacks don't grow crooked in the mind. Yesterday's cords came down from the hill on a sledge, and to ox and iron dogs bit the ends, so a chain could hold without scolding. A sapling pole with two cross handles lives near the pole. For rolling they use it to walk a billet up. Heels together, like stepping a plank onto a rack. No hurry, charcoal burns quick if you invite it to hurry. The foreman looks at the clamp the way a miller looks at a gate measured. Fingers in pockets, eyes on seams. No comment until something earns one. Toward mid-morning the keeper draws a plug in the lower skin and peers with a small lens of mirror and a bit of tin, the old trick to see light without letting light in. The glow is where it should be, 2/3 down, spreading even. He replaces the plug and pats the turf like a man, smoothing a collar on a friend. In his pocket the key for the watch hut on a hook in the hut, a small iron crook for tasting coal. He draws a sliver from the edge, cracks it should ring brittle, show velvet black, and feel so light it asks to be weighed in air. He nods, not to anyone, to the day. You can let your attention rest on the alder stems along the brook for a minute. The clamp will go on easing itself toward lighter smoke, will go on writing its pale lines into higher cold. The boy will go on counting quietly to 30 before he moves another pinch of turf. By afternoon, a finished clamp lies under its own shadow near the path. The turf is peeled and stacked to be used again. The char is shoveled into sacks with a wooden scoop that cannot strike sparks. Each sack is strapped with a band of willow and the mouth tied with a twist of bark. The cart stands with its pole up and its body braced on a stone. Sacks go into by two. Weight against weight, so the road's opinions do not become the cart's. At the charcoal barn by the ironworks, a beam scale weights a balance beam with knife edges, the task for dust to be kept far away. The clerk sets a counterweight in brass 20. Then 40, he adds a small slider 3. Then a quarter and notes the tally in a lined book with a pencil. He sharpens with a penknife on his boot heel. The ironworks lies by water the colour of pewter. Two wheels turn, one to the bellows, one to the tilt hammer. The bellows wheel runs a great chest, whose sides breath in and out, as if the building had learned to keep itself alive. Leather panels, pine ribs, valve flaps that open and shut with the quiet certainty of a door that was hung level. The the wine tube leans into the finery hearth, where pig iron will learn a new name. The other wheel lifts and drops the helven oak beam capped with a face of iron. The water lifts, a cam turns, the tail falls, the head rises, the cam lets go. Gravity agrees. The hammer finds the anvil with the kind of authority nap through when you know it belongs to work and not to anger. Pig iron waits in short bars, called pigs. The big sow mold having fed its litter when the blast ran last month. Pigs lie in a rack by the finery, each with a notch where a hook can hold without being foolish. Slag troughs are cleaned, the floor is sanded where sparks light to write to many karmas. A man chooses 3 pigs, their grey faces grainy with solidified graphite, lays them on an iron plate near the hearth and leans on the poker while the bellows man brings wine slowly up with a leverous comb as a clockmaker's. The finery fire is not a storm, it is a book to be read, turned a page at a time. The first pig goes to the hearth. It leans into coke and charcoal, the better mix, where a little coal lived last winter and still proves convenient, and the two breathes a constant song. The iron puddles on the hearth bottom into a luminous, honey-thick pool, while cinder rises, green-grey at the edge, and the fineryman's hand reads the story through a long bar. His islift stirs moves the bath so air and carbon can reach their understanding. Carbon leaves carried as gas in the breath of the bellows. Silicon and manganese become slag. The bath thickens until it will not run away if asked to stand. He gathers it, a glowing mass, with the bar hoop and drags it toward the lip. Bloom. The bloom goes to the hammer. To men with long tongues carry it like a sleeping, heavy child between them, shoulders squared, eyes half-lidded against a light that pretends to be hot enough to think for itself. Onto the anvil. The hammer drops not a crash, a syllable. Slag spits and runs to the trough. The bloom compacts under even. Timed blows, the helve answers the wheel, and the wheel answers the sluice. The smith turns the mass, shows a new face, lifts a corner with the edge of the anvil, and lets the hammer convince it. The bloom becomes a rough bar, square in section, then nearer to flat. Back to the chafery, the small hearth to bring heat back to the hammer. The work is a loop of 3 rooms, finery, chafery, hammer, and between them a path sanded with old glass, so feet know where not to slip. If your focus softens here, you lose nothing. The bellows will still breathe, the helve will still keep its meter, cinder will still choose the lower way and iron the higher. The bar comes to measure at the shear, a long bench with 2 posts and a shear blade that falls through hot metal because heat is an accomplice. Stingern bar iron is cut to lengths a customer will expect. Ends are stamped with the works mark, a letter and a crown, or a village name turned to initials, so inspectors and merchants can tell who kept their word. A small boy counts bars in bundles and slips a thin strap through and twists it with an iron. No knots near heat, no rope where sparks. Remember, rope exists. He writes 12 with chalk on a plank and leans it where bundles will pass, because chalk on familiar wood is quicker than asking twice. At the charcoal barn, men trample the black dust into the earth with boots that will never be called clean and never need to be. A ladder leans into the loft where a beam drops into the bellows room through a chute. The bellows man runs his hand through the beam and feels the grade fine for wind. Chunk for firebed, powder for the forge, where a boy will make nails tomorrow and learn that a nail's head is not a place for pride, but for patience. He shuts the slide with a push. The slide shows a shine where hands have polished it over years. The charcoal keeps its whispery lightness, but never tries to fly the bin's slope, and the air's damp have their pact. The water makes all this possible. The wheel pit smells of wet oak and iron. The sluice gate is a timber with a strap and a lever. The lever carries a notch that rests against a pin, so that water does not argue beyond its station. Someone once cut a series of small marks into the lever thumbwards that mean winter, summer, ice breaking. And don't be foolish, and hands have obeyed those marks longer than any foreman has lasted. The axle journals take tallow from a horn cup. The man with the horn knows how much, because bearings tell him is he overdoes attentions, and oil runs where it only attracts dust. Late day, a carter backs a flat sledge to the loading stage. To horses stand with a patience that would not be mistaken for boredom by anyone who knows horses. Bars slide off the bench onto the sledge with a wooden groan, the only kind of groan welcome here. The clerk writes a figure in the delivery book. 8 bundles, 200 weight the bundle. Destination harbour. The destination lives as a habit. Iron down river to a timber pier, onto a yawl, then to a port where men own scales and ink and the habit of reading the marks over a pipe, if marks were stories. A mile upslope, a second clamp is closed. The keeper pulls turf, reveals a coal bright as a sky stripped of sun, and eats a heel of bread with cheese, because bread and cheese tell a man the truth about how long he's been on his feet. He pours a finger of water into his palm and scrubs away ash from his knuckles. He leaves the rest in the can for the boy. He lifts the sack with both hands, and the sack says little, because the sack was taught to be strong at the seams, and no one asks it to be more than that. Inside the forge, the fineryman banks the hearth, a ring of coke around a dome of fresh coal. The 2 year covered with a plate that knows its place. He sweeps slag with a wide broom, nivel of birch twigs bound tight, not too pretty to be used. He hangs his tongs on pegs where they live by size and jaw, the way kitchens keep ladles and pans. He scribbles with soapstone on the back of a door, the small kindness he noticed only. Boy caught the bloom with the right turn and the other small thing to mind, keep the chaffrey wind lower at first after dinner. Soapstone doesn't pretend to last, it lasts long enough. If you drift, the wheel will not mind being without a witness. It has turned in earlier darkness than this. The helve will stand with its face just above the anvil. The bar will cool from orange to cherry to a colour someone could name only as ready to stop. The water outside will bring a small piece of sky down under your feet so you can step on it and think you were taller once. Evening, the sluice is lowered. The wheel lingers to revolutions and chooses quiet. The bellows give one last breath like a loyal animal settling in straw. A lamp on a bracket is turned down until the glass stops complaining. The clerk closes the book, leaving a narrow ribbon where tomorrow's page begins, and lays the pencil along the spine as if pencils prefer spines. He pockets the key. The door latch speaks the low, friendly syllable. It says 4 men who leave the place the way they meant to find it in the morning. On the road, the sledge creaks in a register that talks to horses and not to people. Iron on iron would shriek, wood on iron hums. The driver touches the rein once, not to ask, to agree. Above the tree line, a smear of smoke from a distant clamp tells another man's story, and that man will sleep near it on a straw tick and a rolled coat, boots under the bench, bar near the door, shovel on its nail. If a wine turns full, he will stand and shape it to better behaviour with turf and care. He knows no one will thank him by name. He knows the bars that left today know his name in their fibres, which is enough, and the ledger knows it in numbers, which is also enough. Night takes the edges off noises. The mill becomes a box made of silence with a wheel in it that forgot to argue. The clamp breathes slow. The boy in the charcoal barn picks a crumb of black out of a cut and marvels at how much light something can swallow and how little it weighs when it has done so. He wipes his hands on straw, looks at the stars over the line of the barn roof, and waits for a voice that says home. It comes, the voice of someone who has been here longer than the barn and expects to be here when the barn is new again in another century. Tomorrow, blast will run ironstone from the bog and the hill, limestone from the pit beyond the pasture, another story of charges and taps, sows and pigs. Tonight, finery and hammer have done their measure. The path from clamp to bar and is laid across the day like a rope flowing fog. It is made of small things, turf pats, slide marks, soot on a sleeve, a stamp in a bar end, a notch on a sluice lever, a soapstone line on a door. These are quiet weights, and they help sleep find its own measure. The 6th part. Fog hangs in the birches like a low memory. The house barn is joined along its spine. Dwelling and work under one pitched roof. A lean-to room at the gable holds a loom taller than a door and older than any chair in the place. A rushlight glows in a bracket. A small iron stove keeps the air sensible. On the floor, baskets by purpose, raw fleece, washed locks, carded rolls, skeins the colour of straw and cloud and peat. Near the doorway a wooden trough sits on trestles. It will go to the brook later. A coil of linen cord hangs like a quiet sentence. The year's wool begins in spring with shears that prefer patient hands. A ewe stands with her nose tucked into a bend of elbow. The shearer slides the blades till leaves on a spring flat along the skin, so the cut keeps close and kind. Fleece comes away in one field if the hand knows its work. Point to rump, flank to belly, shoulders last. Dirds and burrs live in the breech and go to one basket the back and sides long. Clean staple go to another that will see the deeper care. A girl ties a tag to each fleece with a name in chalk. Names matter when winter remembers who brought what to the table and asks the table to be fair. Washing is water, no hotter than a hand can live in, and no talk of boiling. 2 tubs, one for the first courage, one for the better. The wool lies quiet on the surface and sinks only with persuasion to palms, open, pressing down, never mashing, never twisting. Lanolin lifts like a polite secret into the liquor. The tub rests while the hearth heats stones for the next batch. In the second tub the water runs clearer, in the third it runs clear enough. Fleece goes to the rack, drips, smells like a clean sheep, and the air after rain. The floor under the rack learns to darken with a kind of honesty that brooms respect but never try to undo. Carding gives cloud a direction. To boards with card cloth little wire teeth, set like a meadow of tiny questions pass each other in a rhythm hands have memorized. Load, draw, lift, turn. A lock opens, the fibers agree to lie mostly north-south. Roll eggs soft. Roll sausages of wool pile in a shallow basket. Comb 4 long threads. Card for the rest. The roll sits there like a stall. Useful, unarmed. A cat steals a roll egg and is forgiven because cats teach children to rescue things gently. Spinning belongs to 2 rooms and to centuries. In the corner stands a great wheel. A walking wheel spindle out like a finger pointing to the door. The spinner drafts a ribbon of wool out of the roll egg, steps back, turns the wheel with one hand, and feeds twist into the drawer with the other. Wool answers twist the way rope answers tar. It agrees if you are steady and makes mischief if you hurry. In the other corner sits a Saxony wheel with a treadle, a flyer, and a bobbin. The treadle says tap. The wheel says yes. The flyer carries twist to the yarn and lays it around the bobbin as if winding a day for later. Singles rest on the bobbins until evening. Then to apply together twist against twist, so a thread will not forget its manners when washed or worn. Skeins go on the swifter wooden umbrella of arms and take their measure from the reel. 40 turns a lee. The reel kindly clicks for you at each count. Dyeing is a quiet kitchen science. Alum in a pot crystals that look like hard frost dissolves to make a mordant, a word that means helps colour hold hands. A hank of wool soaks and becomes ready for persuasion. Birch leaves make yellow, as pale as polite sunlight. Onion skins give a deeper gold. Alder and iron turn gold toward olive. And then night madder, bought dear, gives red that looks like the last apples in a cellar like and yields peak violet if you coax it 4 weeks in a jar with patience and something sharp that does not scare wool. Each pot gets its own spoon and its own promises. Spoons for food don't come to this bench. Skeins lift with 2 sticks and drip into a wooden bowl that always smells a little like travel. If your thoughts want to go soft now, let them. The wheel will keep its yes. The pot will hold steady. The skein will take colour without an audience. Warp-weighted loom, a tall, upright frame that keeps its own counsel against a log wall. The long threads hang like rain from a top beam. At their feet, clay weights in pairs hold each bundle straight. A heddle rod, a bar with loops, divides the threads into 2 sets for the simplest weave. Over under over a second, third or fourth heddle rod can make patterns when patience allows. The weaver ties the weighted bundles to the bottom rods and checks the spacing with a hand opened flat. She leans her shoulder into the beater and oaken sword, so each pick of weft sits firm against the last. The shuttle, a boat of wood, carries weft from hand to hand across the frame and back. Cloth grows downward into a future that has not yet chosen a body. Warping takes a day when the cloth will be broad. Pegs in a board make the path, up to pegs, down one, around the cross pegs, so threads do not forget who follows whom. A counting song keeps rows true without needing paper. To children hold the least sticks, the paired slats that keep the order of threads, and learn the quiet pride of not dropping what will become the way the whole room behaves tomorrow. The weaver ties the warping groups to the beam, lifts the first to heddles, and looks through the shed the opening the shuttle loves to see if any thread looks sulky. A bone needle picks the sulk up and persuades it. The first inch is straw, literally, a header of bundled straw woven tight as sacrament, later to be pulled out and put in a chicken's nest. After straw, wool speaks. The first picks of weft walk the line between loose and mean the beater chooses fair. A selvage pinner, little polished hong keeps the edge from forgetting dignity. The beater sets the rhythm, a low thud that can live under a nap. The shuttle's nose clicks lightly against a hand-warp thread's hum when a heddle lifts them and forgive. Outside, the brook has cold opinions about ankles. The fulling trough waits with 2 feet of water and a small addition of soap, tallow and lye, boiled a long hour in a pot that will never cook soup again. Wadmel the cloth likes rough company at first. Stomp in stocking feet. Slow tread, turn, stomp again. 3 women, then 2, then 1 when the others go to warm hands around mugs. The tread does not lose time. Cloth thickens as wool's little scales lock and agree to be neighbours. A fulling border plank with ribs takes the cloth next beat. Fold, turn the board makes a low drum where the palm lands. The cloth shortens, grows denser, finds the hand it will use to keep men warm on a sledge and children safe from wind at a door. If you drift for a stretch, the tread will continue and the brook will not be offended. The cloth knows what to do if you have already shown it what to do once. On better days, a water-powered fulling stock helps the hammers lifted and dropped by a cam on a shaft. The miller lets you borrow when the saw has no quarrel with that. Cloth loops between the stocks and a trough the hammers kiss. Not beat, they do it 1,000 times, while men talk 100 small matters that make a village less lonely. The miller writes a chalk note on the jam, so the next man knows when to give the next man space. To links Wadmel until 4. Drying takes room and the air's permission. Tenter frames stand in a paddock. 4 long rails with holes along the edges. Little iron hooks tenter hook scratch the cloth selges and hold it to measure as it dries. No one pulls mean, they set the stretch, so a yard remains a yard. A child asks why the hooks are called that. The old man says, because they make us wait. And the child nods as if she heard a proverb. When the cloth finishes its slow breath, the hooks release without making a scene. A teasel head bristly flower dried to a tool raises a soft nap of shears, dressed with a sheep's shoulder grease trims it to even. A lump of chalk walks along the cloth to show long threads. The task to be clipped the shears obey until chalk has nothing left to say. Back inside, a bandloom makes narrow goods, belts for sled harness, strips for binding a boot top, bright bands that teach winter not to be a bully. Pattern lives in a small mind on the weavers, knee count to red, 3 blue, 1 white. Turn the shuttle is only a stick here, thread wound around it like intention. The band lives quicker than the broadcloth and still manages to be patient. Tailoring is the quietest of the trades in this house. A man lays a paper on Wadmel that looks like a small map. He sets weight stones with holes drilled and cord tails on the corners, and draws with a chalk that has learned to be blunt. Sharp chalk pretends to be clever, and then goes on strike. Shears travel long and slow and smother the cloth only with their lower lip, while the upper stands kind. Seams will be lapped one side over the other and stitched with a running line because Wadmel respects overlap when elbows learn to work in January. Facings of linen at cuffs, where will wears first a row of pewter buttons poured last winter in a little mould that knew a spoon just before it learned a button, a cord loop for a closure, where a tie is kinder than a knot. If your eye is lower, be easy about it. Needles will still find their same small doors, and the kettle will keep its hum against the stove. and the shears will stop with their points closed, so no sleeve learns a story it didn't ask for. The day tucks its corners. Skeins take a last look at their hooks. The loom leans its weights against the wall the way shoulders lean across a table when the light is near done. Warp gets covered with a cloth because dust knows its chances and should not be allowed to study them. In the yard, a length on the tenter frame turns from wet to only damp in the hour after sundown turns roofs. Blue a hand feels and agrees with what the hand said yesterday. Enough for now. The trough by the brook gets turned over to sleep upside down so frost will not find a lip to hold. Wigs will stack, cloth will leave the beam, be measured with a rod cut to an L and remembered by more than one grandmother, be folded into a chest with cedar cones, be taken out to be a skirt, a tunic, a child's bed wrap, a sledge blanket. Somewhere on a hill a man will stand in a coat stitched here and think about his hands less than he used to. A woman will wear a narrow band at her waist and remember the winter she learned to count patterns while a storm counted itself rude against the door. A child will find a teasel head and think it was always a tool and never a flower. Someone will smile and let the child keep both truths at once. Color keeps books in this place. A small scrap tied to a ledger page shows birch over alum, lichen over stale, madder twice with iron after, woad with patience, black when walnut and iron were in a mood. The ledger's hand is a neat labor that does not ask to be admired and does not accept correction from anyone who has not stood over the pot on a day when the sky forgot to be kind. Next to the ledger, a little bag of alum sits tied. A scoop lives in it, and a line in a chalked box says by more before Michaelmas. At night, the loom keeps still. The weights hang and do not ask for respect beyond the nail that holds them. The shuttle sleeps in a basket with a ball of weft for a pillow. The beater leans against the side and looks like a sword in a bad dream and behaves like a spoon in a good kitchen. The brook outside writes one thin line for the moon. Somewhere under the roof, wool moths consider learning to read and are shown the door because cedar and good habits speak a language even moths do not ignore. Morning will find the heddles where hands left them. The wheel will remember twist. The trough will go back to the brook. Shoulders will laugh at cold for the first minute and then call it friendship again. Cloth will advance 3 fingers. Hooks will be kind. Shoes will dry by the stove. A coat will hang with its cuffs turned back because cuffs wear first. The day will take the same size steps and a few different turns, and sleep, if it borrows a little time now, will be returned with interest when the tea comes off the stove and the ball of weft finds the shuttle and both decide the weather inside is fair. The 7th part. Before dawn the road is a pale stripe pressed into the valley, edges softened by last night's small snow. Birch stems on either side stand like careful pencils. The river beside them lies under a firm crust and carries the moon, if it were a plate. In the yard of the way station low building, turf on the roof, lamp asleep behind the window, 2 runners lean against a sled body, barewood drinking the cold. A man in mitts warms a cake of wax in his palm and rubs it along the grain of each runner. He buffs with a fistful of reindeer hair until the sheen turns from dull to shy. The smell is tallow and pine, and a note of smoke from the stove inside that has already learned today's work. The post horn does not sound at this hour. Schedules live on a board inside, chalk lines in neat rows. Here, the day begins with small instruments, a scraper to clean yesterday's frost from runner bottoms, a kettle that melts a pan of snow into honest water, a rag on a peg to wipe brass buckles so no finger learns greed from cold metal. In the shed, harness hangs in pairs, collars lined against the bite, traces oiled, single trees polished where they meet the rings. The stableman feels each strap with a quick pinch to find the stiff spots. He works tallowing with a thumb until leather remembers its manners. A wooden plough stands against the fence, an A of timber with iron shoes and a chain that knows the hook on the collar bar. When the road drifts, the plough goes first. To horses lean into the yoke. The blade opens the drift in a V, and a roller made from a section of pine trunk rides behind to pack the path tight. Today the drift is honest but not proud. A pair of men walk ahead with one's thin saplings with a black rag at the top to set along the edge, so the wind can be reminded where the road chooses to run. They push each wand into the snow to the same depth by eye. When a man's stride is steady long enough, his eye learns measures that never find a reason to lie. Inside, the station keeper checks the register. Next coach from the south at 7. Next sleigh from the north at 6:55 if both keep their habits. 2 bags will exchange hands, with no one needing to share the bench longer than it takes to put a name on a line. He warms the nib of his pen by the flue tile, dips it, and makes a dot in the place a figure will sit later. Dots are simple promises kept between hands and paper. The mail bag has letters tied with blue tape that will be knotted with a bow easy to loosen, but uninviting to curious hands. Parcels hold their twine close. Anyone who opens one will be known by the way the knot returns to itself wrong. On the wall, a map of the road inclines between towns, tiny dots where the stations live, a shadowed edge where hills pretend to be too tall and then agree to be crossed. The keeper lays a finger on each dot he will think about today, and then drops his hand. The stove pushes a small sigh into the room and remembers to stop there. The north sleigh comes over the rise, bells small and rational, a pair of horses stepping without hurry, but not pretending the day will wait. The driver stands, knees bent, feet set on the sled boards, hands on the reins. His coat turns him broad, his hat turns him attentive. His eyes know where the wind has laid a trick and where it has merely dusted the world with formality. He pulls into the yard, steps down, and puts his hand flat on each horse's shoulder in turn, not because they need reassurance, because he belongs to a set of rules that keeps cold from being in charge of courtesies. The exchange is a set of practiced gestures. The keeper brings the bag. The driver gives the receipt with a thumbprint where a signature would live if time were a softer creature. A new bag goes onto the sled, under a canvas that wears its own strap and buckle. A crock of oat mash appears from the stable. Horses drop their noses without apology. Steam drifts from flanks in a line that suggests sleep to anyone watching. No one watches. They are busy with work that respects itself by not demanding admiration. If you set your attention down for a moment on the rim of the water pail, on the seam of the runner, on the frost edge, on the stable latch, the road will still go on being a road, and the sleigh will go on being a line between 2 towns, and the bag will carry what it carries without needing your eyes. After the mail, the locals come. A kicksalter, steel runners, wooden chair, handles like a ladder's top, slides onto the pack strip. A woman stands on one runner, pushes with the other, rides, stops, sets her boot back, repeats. A sack of flour sits roped to the chair seat. A child in a red cap sits on the other side with hands in muff and face open to the air. From the hills, a skier descends a farm track, long pine boards, tips bent with a steam box last autumn. Tarred bottoms that tell snow to be a friend, a single stave in his right hand instead of 2 poles, old style used for pushing on flats, and as a tiller on the downs. He steps into the yard and kicks snow off the bindings, then leans the skis against the eave where a line of similar leans already spells out a day. Inside, he buys a cup of thick coffee and the slab of rye coins ring polite on the counter, and then go quiet. The road runs along a frozen lake for a time. The ice carries cart ruts from last week's movement, accrued set pine boughs along a safe line earlier in the season. Tips facing oncoming travel, so wind will not teach them to lie flat. Near the outlet, where water remembers to move even in cold, the line comes ashore and crosses on a timber bridge whose rails wear a scuff where sled runners learn to kiss during a dozen winters. A man from the station walks the bridge each morning with a chisel and clears the grooves so runners will not learn mischief. On his belt, a small hammer hangs. He taps the railing posts, listening for the change from soundwood to play acting. The posts keep their truth today. Markers stand along the road at measured distances, stone shafts with flat heads, numbers cut shallow and sometimes worn shy of legibility. A crown or a town mark may live there to sign to travellers that the road is watched by someone who remembers, even if names change in books. The station keeper notes new drifts on a slate by the door with arrows and to words bend blind. So the afternoon driver will slow at the place where wind and hill conspired this morning. Chalk is an instrument winter respects. A plough team goes out on the high stretch. The driver sits the board behind the blade and keeps the chain sweet. If the chain shortens, the blade digs to hard, and the horses lose interest in conversation. Another man walks with a long-handled shovel, taking the hump off the side, a breath at a time. On the crest, ones march in a line, black dots against white, each one somebody's touchstone. When the next white comes down sideways, the plough leaves a double ridge the kicksleds take with a hiss. Men on skis glide into the lee of the station and lean, hot from effort, though the air deals in cold. If drowsiness draws a thin curtain, let it. The horses will keep their shoulders, the plough will hold its true angle, and the station clock will still lift its minute hand a district's breadth while you rest. Midday, a southbound coach arrives, and the yard fills with a small choreography. Outbound passengers stretch stiff knees, inbound travelers taste the air and discover it is newer than they feared. A boy runs a pail for the foot warmer stones, soapstone blocks heated at the stove and tucked under a bench to teach heat the way heat should speak to boots. Another child fetches a handful of straw to stuff into the gap at a sled back where wind makes a note nobody likes. A man in a blue coat flips the blanket on the back of a horse to the dry side wool. Remember, sweat turning keeps friendship. The keeper opens the door to the warm room and sets a bowl of soup on the wide table. It tastes of barley, carrot, a bone that worked through to dinners and still had a gift left, and a pinch of dill from windowsill pots that do not plan to star in any parade, but find a way to be cheered anyway. Bread came this morning from a bakery to station's back, wrapped in cloth. The cloth now warms on a chair rail and will smell like hands when drought calls for a cloth later that knows bread. The ledger receives 2 lines: coach, southbound, on time, and sleigh, northbound, 3 minutes early. The keeper writes with small letters that refuse drama and sit kindly between the lines. He rubs a knuckle in a circle on the paper, where ink thought about pooling and convinced it to behave. On the windowsill, the lamp that watched the yard at 4 rests, wick trimmed, glass smudged with the simple truth of breath meeting cold pain later. It will shine again, lower, not to order anyone, only to be seen. Up the hill in the afternoon, the plough drifts to the side, and 2 men switch to drag a bundle of brush bound tight with a chain. They pull it behind the horses to smooth the furrows into a piece the runners will approve of. One man looks back along the road with the pleased face of someone who has turned a rough into an even, and did not have to argue to do it. He stamps his boots on a plank set at the side of the trail for exactly that. Snow leaves when asked to buy a plank and patience. At the northern edge of the district, a small ferry sits frozen into a cradle of ice. In summer it hauls carts over the narrow sound with a chain and a capstan. Now the ice road wears spruce boughs every 10 steps, and the ferry sleeps with ropes coiled and the canvas hauled tight over the winch. The ferryman walks the ice with an iron-tipped staff and taps there, here learning the thickness with his ears and his feet. He sets a fresh bough when the old one drooped. He comes into the station at dusk and drinks coffee with 2 sugars, because sugar makes winter smaller without telling lies about it. By evening, sky and ground have agreed on the same shade of blue. The last post sleigh of the day slides in, bell soft, breath visible. The driver has a frost fringe on his scarf. He grins anyway, because grins burn nothing and return heat in trade from other people. He lifts the bag, only one now on the counter. The keeper slips the strap, checks the seal for an impression he knows by fingertip in the dark, nods, and sets it on the scale. The weight is the weight, the number fits the book's patience. A child asleep on a bench, under a cloak, does not stir when a door opens. The door's leather hinge learned restraint. If you drift here, the lamp will keep the line of light across the boards. The clock will take another small step. The snow at the door will surrender to the brush hung on the peg by the jamb when a boot remembers to care. Night sometimes brings aurora, but tonight it brings only a clean cold and a sky where stars do not feel compelled to compete. The horses stand with noses over the stall doors, hay finding them the way it finds honest mouths. The harness hangs from pegs, bridle bits wrapped in cloth, so breath will not teach iron to stick to tongues in the grey hours. A pail stands turned upside down, so ice will not think to sit on its lip. The station keeper banks the stove with a split from a stack that knows how to dry quietly. He checks the chalkboard. One line wiped, one left 4 dawn. He turns the lamp down until its wick glows like a thread, and then reaches his fingers to pinch it. The gesture learned when he was small and kept, because some gestures carry their own truth. Far along the road a lantern moves, where the plough team is finished and a man walks back under its circle, the wand over his shoulder, the chain of the drag coiled neat in his other hand to keep it from learning bad ideas. He will hang it on a nail, and it will hang there like a tool that knows its own name. He will draw a line on the wall with a charcoal nub that lives in a crack near the door. Line done to the crest. No flourish, no exclamation, just the simple fact a morning will thank when it finds it. Nights hold their own chores. The keeper opens the stove door a finger's width to listen. He hears a gentle answer and closes it again. He sets the footstones on the hearth edge, so morning will have warm rectangles to slide into waiting sacks. He drapes a pair of wet mitts on a line and turns them once, so the leather will not remember a fold as a permanent opinion. He sets the horn on the peg and does not touch it. It is not a night for horns. The road will be here in the morning, perhaps with a new ripple, perhaps with a clean, fast strip where skates could write initials if someone were foolish enough to carry skates in January to a road meant for runners. No one is. The wands will stand like thin sentries. The mile post that carries a worn number will learn its fraction of moon. The stable will turn breath into a soft weather. Somewhere farther north a reindeer team may pass under a tree line. Bells different, snow different, that is another station's business. And this one wishes them fair work without needing to say it. People sleep in beds lined with wool and lined again with quiet. A bag rides in a locked cupboard that believes in hinges and small keys. The ledger rests with its ribbon in the right place. The shovel stands in the corner with a shadow behind it that resembles a taller man who left years ago and is still present in the way the shovel knows what to do. The kicksword leans outside. Runners lifted by 2 blocks, so frost will not weld them to the plank. The river lies under its own roof and keeps its slow talk for fish and stones. The valley accepts the night the way a table accepts a bowl set down well, with a soft answer and the promise of work in the morning. The 8th part. The outer coast begins as a suggestion and becomes a list of names you learn with your hands. Low skerries like the backs of resting animals, taller islets with grass that has decided to be practical, a seam of water that moves one way on the surface and another a span down. A white painted pole on the headland shows to blackboards that become one when you steer the right line. Farther inland, a cairn of stones rises from naked rock, lime washed, shouldered against the weather the way a man sets his back to hold a door. The morning is level and clean. You could balance a coin on it for a minute and no one would scold you for sorcery. In the Pilot Cove the boats rest in a 6/2 on moorings, half beached on oaken skids that remember winters. Ribs under tar planks, thwarts polished by coats, a locker forward with the things that make small distances larger, heaving lines, a boat hook, a lantern with a bull's-eye lens that has been kind to more than one night. A mast foot waits for its spar, the lug sail sleeps in a bundle under canvas. Men move in the way men move at a place that is both home and dispatch. One checking the oars for a loosened thaw pin. One lifting a coil of warp from the shed and letting it drop to find its mind without kinks. One looking up the signal mast as if it were a neighbour's face. On that mast, a black ball that will hoist when a ship is standing in, and once a pilot a cone to show wind direction for those who prefer to learn with eyes and not with skin. Charts open on a table under the eave. Vermilion for rocks that mean more, blue for shallows that mean less when you know the tide's citizenship numbers like small. Faithful stones set where the surveyor once set his feet. A parallel rule lies where it fell last time, honest and exact. Pencils are stubbied down to the kind of length that makes them write better than they used to. The pilot master draws a line from the outer lead to the inner, checks the bearing, nods to nobody, and sharpens one of the pencils with a knife that knows how to be careful around graphite. The tide book lives in a pocket with a bit of string tied in the place that suits this week. High tide will be around the time when the fish cart leaves the south village, and low tide will keep its appointment with the bell on the iron buoy as the evening forgets to be urgent. Above the table hangs a board with small painted marks that repeat the shapes of day marks in the district. To diamonds that become one for the inside, cut a triangle over a square for the sound by the elms, a white cairn with a black belt for the turn, where the depth pretends to be modest and then proves it is. The lookout, a boy not old enough to carry a beard, but old enough to carry a glass, calls from the hill. Schooner standing in red jibs, outer lead. He doesn't shout, shouting is for birds. The pilot master raises the black ball on the signal mast, slow and even, then drops it to half when the schooner dips her ensign in reply. The boat crew step aboard with the same neatness they use to sit at a table. Oars out the first strokes are short, keeping the blades from kissing the stones near shore, then longer. The boat choosing glide over urgency, because urgency is for people who don't know the bottom. The schooner is trimmed for her reach, a weight of canvas to pause, a touch of weather helm that a thumb can soothe. She shortens sail without advertising it and makes a lee for the pilot boat. The hook lands on her rail where 100 hooks have been welcomed. The pilot climbs the side, as if climbing stairs he built himself last week. He doffs his cap to the mate, nods to the helmsman, sets his hand on the wool spoke not to take. To greet the captain, steps a finger off the compass card to share the present bearing and moves aside a quarter pace. A pilot takes authority by not reaching for it. Lead lying down. The deckhand calls marks from habit by the Mark 5 and the half 6 by the Deep 7. The leather and cloth tanks slip past hand and eye, code older than most flags that fly. The pilot watches the day marks and does math that looks like faith. To boards on the headland form one, a white square lines with a dark notch in the ridge. The tired set shows in the way kelp tails lie. He says, steady, on a breath that's friendlier than a command. The helmsman answers with the wheel more than the mouth. If your attention eases and wanders to the way, the wake rights on the shoulders of small rocks. Nothing will be offended. The lead will keep it speaking. The marks will keep their shape. And the pilot will not forget the sound that lives under this hour. A day mark under the point is paint on a rock. No. 26. Black band put there in summer by 2 men borrowed from the lighthouse crew. They carried lime and lampblack in buckets, stuck their boots to the slope with rope and spikes, and made the sea's grammar visible to men who prefer letters to guesswork. Up above, a timber leading mast in a meadow holds to boards. A farmer once complained that sheep wouldn't graze under it. The pilot board paid him in fence wire. Now sheep stand in the shade and look at nothing, which is their right. The marks save powder and voices both. The light at the sound is a sector light. Low white house with a squat tower. In its lantern sits a small drum lens with red in one pane and white in the rest. If you stand where the pilot tells you, the flash is white, and white means contentment. Move a cable too much to the south, and the light blushes red in admonition. Nights, men steer by that blush into virtue. Days, they steer by painted boards and the way the water tells a patient ear what it holds. The lightkeeper keeps the wick trimmed and the glass clean without asking thanks. Past the outer scaries, buoys speak another language. Iron can, painted with a number that has survived several winters, sits on a chain that knows its anchor stone and does not argue with it. A bellbuoy farther out rings when ground swell remembers to come in. It is a decent ring, not one to excite kitchens along the shore. Closer to the harbour mouth, a perch marks a rock with a top that only likes to be seen when someone else is embarrassed. The perch carries a small cross whose arms point in the way you should not go. An old joke that is factual enough to deserve repetition. The pilot logs the entrance in a little book with a pencil tied to it by string. Ship's name, draft, wind, tide, time at the outer lead, time at the inner. He writes his own words for any small changes. kelp sucked along brindle set east 1 point, perch off gullhums in swell, white sector longer by a hand. The book will make someone else's morning a better thing. Pilots write books for the next pilot, not for history. Shoremen signal with arms when the schooner passes the fish pier. Left arm like a yard, right like a mast. Then cross to say all right, an old semaphore that a dozen boys learn by watching their older brothers, and then forget only when boring conversations need to be made shorter. Nets hang in a line, weights glimmer, the tar kettle by the loft door breathes like a small animal that knows its place in a family. You could nap standing up against the rail here, and the ship would not mind. The pilot will keep his breath uniform. The helmsman will keep the wheel honest. The mate will keep sentences short and useful. Farther inside the sound, the channel narrows and the leads become closer friends. A white cairn with a black cap lines with the bow when the underwater ridge would prefer to see your keel in a year's time in a yard. The pilot says, Porter spoke, without concern. Down in the hold, a cask knocks against a board in a rhythm a man can understand is amiable. Up in the shrouds, a flag takes a thought, but doesn't act on it. In winter, the pilotage shrinks and changes its tools. A pole boat pushes through Fraser ice in the morning to place small branches juniper or spruce in a row across the shallow mouth of the inner creek, so the fishermen can remember the path home after dusk. A staff with a whiteboard is set on the edge of the channel, and a staff with black stands on the opposite edge. The pair make a gate that says good when you pass between, and check your habits when you brush one. In deeper ice, men cut a narrow way with chisels and let the tide finish the job. Tide likes work that looks like its own idea. On fair weather days between work, the pilot station keeps its craft ready with a care that looks like affection and is actually discipline. Oars come in 4 oil linseed boiled and warmed with a little resin, worked in with the palm until the grain rises once more and then consents. A sail is stretched and looked at square by square, a palm and needle walk, a seam that has begun to wonder if time is anything to take seriously. A lead line is checked against white marks on a boathouse door, a nail for each fathom, a notch just so, and any tangle is combed out the way one would comb a child's hair, firm, not harsh. A surveyor from the hydrographic office visits sometimes, wearing a cap with a badge that has older salt on it than the cap itself. He brings a plane table and sighting alidade and sets tripod legs into gaps in the rock that look as if they waited for exactly those legs. He speaks the same language as the pilots, but pronounces some words differently. He reads angles, writes numbers with a pencil that knows about spit and blow, and makes small crosses on paper where rocks live that have been too modest to introduce themselves. The pilot learns a notch in a ridge he hadn't noticed. 2 months later, a new number appears on the chart, and men who never met the surveyor feel he is less a stranger. If drifting pulls your gaze to the foam between 2 stones, you can let it. Nothing in this part asks for applause. The boat will find water, the marks will show their faces, and the tide will move whether or not we spend our attention counting. Evening, the schooner warps to the wharf with a line around a bollard that has outlasted 3 coats of paint and will outlast a few more. The pilot says thank you as he should, receives the coin he will hand to the station's box, and steps into his own boat, which moves as if happy to see him, but not unprofessional about it. He rows back not to prove strength or speed, but to enjoy measured work. The lads on the wall judge his track by the way his oar blades lift water without being unkind to it. The signal ball comes down on the mast and rests in its wooden cup. A gull stands on the cap, if it were a small province, and the appointment had always been meant for it. The day has its own ledger in the station. Pilot number, ship, times, wind. Remarks in small words that carry more than their length. Smell of kelp in the cut. Bell buoy lazy. Red in the sector sharper. Row home like a chair. A small square of toasted bread appears from the pan on the stove. Someone breaks it and hands the halves to 2 men, without counting who is older and who is hungrier. The stove keeps a thin rattle under its lid, a kind, unimportant sound that helps rooms remember what they are for. The cairn on the point grows pink and then grey. The boards on the leading mast become one dark line, and then no line at all. And then the sector light begins its white. It blinks right where it should. And nobody makes notes because mentioning a clock that keeps time adds nothing to the balance of the day. The boy who watched the hill takes the glass down and puts it in its wooden box, face toward the hinge, the way he was shown. A last small boat crosses the inner water. One man, one pair of oars, one small lamp in the bow. He keeps the white sector on his shoulder like a companion and says nothing to any fish that may be listening. His wake folds itself back into the ordinary 5 boat lengths. Behind him the pilot house window shows lamplight on the chart and a pencil where pencils prefer to rest. A rope hangs on a peg in a coil whose inside turn tells another hand that the man who hung it meant someone else to be pleased in the morning. You can put the picture down here like a mug on a table. The wind will turn a degree without asking, the tide will make its appointment, the marks will not forget their vows. The cairn will watch night the way it watches day by not trying to teach it. The boat will sleep against the post with one fender interested in a knotted tide for itself. The 9th part. A frost takes the meadow first, then the track, then the timber mouth of the shaft. The head frame is simple 4 posts braced, a sheave at the top, rope slung over and down into the square dark. At one side, a horsegin stands with its circle of beaten earth, 2 arms out from a vertical drum, one horse leaning, then the next in turn, the drum winding and unwinding the line like a patient wrist. The yard smells of pine from last week's pit props, of tallow on leather, and of the mineral sour the wind lifts out of the shaft, no matter how polite the day. A bell hangs on a beam. It gives a single, level note when the kibble is ready to rise. The day begins above with hands and weights. A scale beam sits on a trestle by the oar pile. Knife edge clean a set of stone weights with numbers chipped into their faces, weights in a box with felt on the bottom so grit will not teach the box to lie. A picker's table stands near planks with small gaps, to boards tilted toward waiting wheelbarrows. Men tip small carts of broken rock, and others lean over with hammers light enough to be honest, knocking waste from ore, or from waste. Copper shows us colours that have learned to be shy, a green rinse along the crack, a black on the face of a stone, a red-brown like brick under water. The pickers do not hurry. They learned early that haste makes more wheelbarrows and less copper. At the shaft mouth the kibble tub with iron bands and ears for the hook weights on its plank bed. A thick rope comes up over the sheave, down under the drum, and out to the horsegin. The driver clicks his tongue and gives the horse enough word to begin, not too much, not a sermon. The drum turns, the rope climbs, the tub lowers. The bell at the head frame strikes. Once a second bell answers faint from below. To men by the capstan stand with the brake bar ready, in case the rope would like a reminder that gravity has opinions, but no real authority here if a hand keeps the habit of the brake. Underground, the ladder weighs and levels feel their own weather. A candle burns from an iron spike wedged in a seam, another sits in a small clay cup on a ledge. Both give the kind of light that keeps courage level, that does not wake it. Men wear caps with a bit of birch bark bent to hold a stub tallow drips and forgets to cause grief. The air is not sharp, but it moves. The old vent shaft has its own slow talk. Along a wall, timber sets stand in regulars, 2 posts and a cap, wedges driven home up top, lagging boards behind to keep loose from thinking about travelling. Where the roof spreads, a stole spans big timber laid across, cribbed and blocked, a bridge that tells gravity to choose a different street. The load here is a vein as broad as a man's arm, pinching to a stripe, then swelling. The face is marked with chisel lines that lead the eye and the tall, short, straight, a rhythm learned hand to hand. Drill steel rods sit in a bucket, edges kept honest on a stone. The steel is held by one, struck by another, with a sledge quarter turns between blows to men speaking without needing to add words over what hammer decides. A hole advances. In some rooms wedges and feathers would follow. In others a spoon bit and patience. Here, today, just a neat crack opened, where stone agreed to remember its seams. Handbar and gad lift pieces into the kibble. The kibble fills a tug on the rope, one bell, the drum above takes load, and the tub rises out of sight. If your attention wanders toward the rivulet of water along the level's edge, that is all right. The water will keep to its little channel, and the timber will keep its shoulders, and the man with the sledge will still turn the drill a quarter when the blow lands. Where water tires of behaving, a pump keeps manners. In the sump, a rag and chain pump turns an endless loop of chain with round leather discs slid at intervals along it. The loop runs down a wooden tube to the water, up through the tube and over a pulley, and back down again. As the discs climb, they carry water in the tube's throat. The flow spills into a trough that leads it away to a place assigned. The chain rides on cedar guides that prefer the work, and the noise is a quiet, agreeable whisper. In another reach, flat rods, long timbers, linked end to end, carry power from a wheel above ground, through bearings and kinks and corners, to a small pump underground. The rods nod their long heads at each other and pretend they are simple. Ventilation is a matter of doors and scents. A brass door plank with leather hinge, a latch you cannot see in the dark, and nonetheless find with the exact reach you learned last winter, opens to send air along the right drift, closes to make another drift worthy of the name. A canvas windsock hangs from a pole in a tight place, so the place will be less tight. The sock tells which way drift means to happen, and how much it intends to go to work. In a narrow stope, a cloth sheet damp hangs to keep dust polite. A man complains about the way the edge touches his shoulder, and then he smiles at himself and does not complain again. Back at surface, the first kibbles dump into the picker table's open palm, or smaller than a fist, spills down to a bean oversize, goes to the breaker jaw made of iron, where one bar moves and the other refuses. The jaw wears the day's temper, like a brace wears a groove. It makes small stones out of stones until the men can see what they are about. Once broken and picked, or rests in a pile under a lean-to to keep weather off until the roasters have time. Roasting calcining takes all that remembers sulfur and persuades it to forget. Roasting is a yard of laid discipline. Beds of ore and brush stack in low heaps, vents cut through so air can find its way. A man touches a coal to the brush, steps back, and watches until the heap learns to be its own weather. Once it has learned, he does not leave it to think too much. He walks, lifts a plate here, smothers a mouth there, keeps the heat from forgetting itself and turning foolish. Across the yard, a water trough stands with a shovel on its rim, and a barrel of sand waits in case a pole needs a cooler thought. The smoke is thick with lessons. It rises and thins and writes nothing cruel. If you close your eyes for a patch of minutes, the rag and chain pump will still lift the roast bed, will still colour from grey to a mild brick. The bell at the head frame will still answer a bell below with the timing of men who prefer order to oratory. Toward the smelter, a low building of stone and brick holds heat the way a chest holds linen. The shaft furnace sits at the centre, a breast high with a notch for tapping and a 2-year set into its side through which blast goes in. Charcoal sacks stitched with hemp twine stacks against one wall, roasted or in bins, limestone in smaller bins, everything with its separate scoops that never switch sides. The bellows are water driven, leather sides rising and falling with a dignity that does not need witnesses. A boy oils rods where wood meets iron, and then looks at his oil-black fingers as if he'd read a short, true book. Charge goes into the throat of the furnace in layers, charcoal or limestone charcoal again. The man at the bellows lever gives the blast a notch up, no making a speech of it. Through the fire breast the bed glows and settles. Sulfur burns to gas and leaves silica, and the rest learn to be a slag that floats and carries trouble with it. Copper gathers down with iron to a mat moves toward the hearth. Nothing is showy, the only bright is where bright belongs. On the furnace face a little watch hole lets a man see colour and not be the less for it. He sees yellow go to white, go to the almost blue-white no one talks about or recommends, and he drops the blaster whisper to bring the fire humble again. When it is time, the tap bar goes in. It noses the clay plug in the tap hole. The plug gives up. Slag comes first, thin, runny, green-grey with a glassy finish. It flows into a 4 hearth, and then out along a race to a bed of sand. It hardens into loaves that will walk out of the yard on a cart and later, with patience and craft, become the red pigment that heats a house without fire. After slag, mat after mat on days of excellence metal, but today, it suits the plan. The tap plug goes back, the furnace keeps its quiet arguments with wind and weight, and always wins them by patience rather than strength. In a smaller hearth the mat will see air and fire again, until it gives up iron and keeps copper for itself. A long bar stirs, the bath slag rolls off and settles with its fellows in a corner. Pink shows under yellow, where copper learns its own face. When metal palls, they cast pigs a shallow trench in sand. A ladle lifted by two hands pours as much as a ladle should the surface skins. And a boy who watched his father do this once scratches a little cross in one with a stick, because a day with a tiny mark on it seems truer. No one tells him not to. The pig's cooler mark is stamped with a hand die, the work's sign and the district's pride. Across the yard, a mill house hammers bars not for thinness, but for certainty. Beating cleans a skin, knocks scale off, makes the grain remember the same direction. The tilt hammer a valley away beats iron here. A lighter fall speaks to copper. The anvil sits on an oak stump that grew long before anyone here. The stump itself speaks softly when work is good. Side trade, quiet and wide, red, the roaster's waste and the smelter's cooled slag, ground and weathered and washed, become an ochre that mixes with linseed oil into a paint that keeps wood from learning sorrow in the weather. A man runs the powder through a sieve that knows how to be particular. Another boils oil in a low pot with a small care. A third stirs pastes with a paddle that has its own hook on a beam and doesn't fraternize with spoons. In a corner a board wears thirds raw wood, a single coat, a double, and stands outside in rain, sometimes to report back with facts. Barns along this district have been grateful for this red longer than to wars and 3 births, and the way the river decides to be wide in spring. If you drift here, allow it. The bellows will take the next breath, the pig will cool, the rag and chain discs will keep lifting cups of water with their slow, ridiculous genius. Dinner in the yard is a lid lifted from a pail. Slices of rye, cheese wrapped in waxcloth, a bit of pickled fish that tells a story about Brian, and a good barrel. Men sit on boards laid across drifts of tailings, steam rising from coats where the morning met the underground. Spoons clink, someone says nothing with his mouth, and everything with the way he passes his neighbor a slice. The horse at the gin breathes in clouds. A boy swaps horses and rubs a wither under the collar with a flat of a hand, because that is a thing that saves more trouble than it is worth to talk about. Afternoon goes down shaft again to timber. A new set goes in near the face. Posts stand on blocks, so earth will not drink their feet in a single wet month. Caps notch into them with a seat that keeps load spread, and kind of ribbon of bark between post and rock becomes a gasket any engineer would be proud to borrow. Wedges drive home with the mallet's deep sentence. The mallet returns to its nail and looks, from a distance, like a sleeping bird. The stull across the wide place takes to men on ropes. A third below with a pike to help it find the sill. A fourth stands back, looking along the top line, plumb by eye, level by habit. No one mistakes luck for skill, or skill for luck, and nobody calls attention to either. In a side room, the sampler works with a steel mortar and a little pestle, a handful of chips from the faces, a small reduced to fine, a blowpipe lamp, and a charcoal block old assay. He melts a speck and reads the color of the bead when cool. He writes in a small book, flicks dust from the edge, and tucks the book where dust cannot learn its alphabet. His numbers are not the last chords, but they prevent foolishness, and foolishness is the only thing this place keeps less of over time. Outdoor light slants to blue. In the headframe yard, the last kibbles of the day rise with little drama and medium pride. The pickers stack a final barrow of good stone under the lean-to. The man at the scale replaces the stone weight in its box and lays the small one on the beam. If it were a bird, he will ask to wake later with no complaint. A broom speaks the language of the floor. A shovel learns where to lean without later surprising toes. The bell hangs untroubled. A man rakes the roast bed to a sleeping shape, bricks over a vent, lays a shovel across as a sign and not as a barricade. The air tastes of metal and pine, and a very little smoke that isn't an argument to anyone who has learned how days smell when they finish well. Night helps rooms remember their shapes. Underground, candles pinch out with fingers that learned this from grandfathers. Ladders take only as much weight as they are asked, no step rights, any last-minute surprises. The brattice door stands open in the way the vent wants it to. The canvas sock goes still. The rag and chain pump clunks a last half-turn and stops with a disc just at the top of the tube like a thought remembered. The horse-jing rope is belayed. The horse lead hangs on its peg. A nose blows into a manger and then rests. In the smelter house, the blast drops a notch and then another. The 2-year learns silence again without dressing it up. The tap hole is daubed, the 4 hearths scraped, the ladle turned mouth down on a block. A boy who scrubbed the floor with sand and a broom draws a circle in the dust with the broom handle and smiles at it, then wipes it out with his boot, suddenly embarrassed about loving circles. No one saw, or everyone did, and no one thought anything that needed saying. If you slip away here, the ledger will keep its line for the day. The bell will keep that last silent shape in the air, as if it had rung. The red in the bin will keep its promise to a wall that has not yet met weather. Morning will return in the customary way. Frost on the plank, rope a little stiff and glad for a pinch of tallow. Hoss ears forward, men's hands remembering the weight of the brake. Underground candles like small reliable stars. The pump will clear its throat and then talk as much as needed. A new stall will take its place where the vein spreads. Charge will go in, slag will go out, Matt will decide to be something else by and by. A pot of paint will travel to a farm, a hand will stir it, a brush will lift, a board will accept. The board will later face rain with a modest smile and say nothing proud. We take note of what holds the place together. Rope, beam, wedge, wind, water turn to work, weight told to be harmless, heat asked to behave. These are the small agreements that make it easy to sleep. The 10th part. Wind comes from the west with salt folded into it. The island is a knuckle of rock, wearing a low crown of grass, black ribs of iron bolted, where sea eats most. Steps cut into the face climb to a door with red lead under its paint. Inside, a spiral of iron treads rises along a brick cylinder, each step with a pattern of holes that let dust fall through and not pretend to be part of the story. The keeper's hand skims the rail as he climbs, habit more than support. On a landing he pauses at the oil room, bright cans lined like quiet soldiers, each with a screw cap chain tethered, each stamped with a figure that the book recognizes. Wick boxes sit beside them, wicks lie flat in rolls, edges straight as if taught by a ruler that would be embarrassed to be seen in a school. Above, the service room is cool and smells faintly of brass polish and clean kerosene. A red curtain hangs before the lantern door to soothe the outside light. The clockwork weight rests in its shaft cylinder of iron with a hook and a chain that runs over the sprocket to the carriage above. The governor 2 small balls on arms weights to argue for steadiness when the lamp asks the lens to move. On a bench, chamois, whiting in a jar, soft brushes, a small tin of graphite for places that prefer dry attention. The keeper lifts the latch and steps into the lantern room. Glass everywhere and none of it for looking through. The Fresnel stands rings of prisms, catadioptric crown and base, dioptric belt in the middle, each segment catching, bending, and returning light to a useful shape instead of letting it wander the way light prefers when left alone. The lens sits on a great bearing. Some stations float the whole on a mercury bath, a silver lake that needs care, and never hurry here. Rides a ring of rollers, oiled and shy of grit. He lays a palm on the brass gallery rail, not to take possession, to greet. He lifts a shutter, tests the ease of the turn. Smooth. He lowers it again. Maintenance is a litany of small truths. He breathes on a prism and watches the fog of his breath run up and off to find the next facet. No drag, no smear. If he sees a mark, whiting and water make a paste. Chamois persuades until the glass forgets fingerprints ever existed. He rubs the burner's air tubes with a cloth. Soot does not belong where air learns its manners. The wick 4 concentric rings today, trimmed to a crown, so the flame will sit with a level head, gets its attention with a brass trimmer. He shears a whisper off the top, then dusts crumbs away with a camel hair brush. He lifts the font to check the oil. He never lifts it by the burner fingers. Learn to avoid the habit that once caused a stationer pain and a week of apologies to sea and shipping both. Down on the landing, the assistant swings a wrench on the fork bell's governor. The bell is cast iron and honest, its frame sits bolted to an iron trestle anchored into rock with dogs that have tasted salt longer than the youngest man here has tasted bread. The striker arm lifts and falls by a cam on a shaft, the shaft turned by a weight in a tube. Wind has its say about voices. The bell speaks a measured note. The district knows to strokes every half minute when the weight is thick enough to turn ship rails into ghosts. Today clarity rules, so the clapper rests. Still, you check in fair weather. Things that sleep well wake well. The lightroom keeps a book. He opens it. Yesterday's wind and visibility. The time the lamp was lit. The time quenched remarks like straight pins. Bird strike at 3:10. Pain sound. Fog bank west stood off. Ship passed north. Hom 1 prolonged at 2 minutes. He writes this morning's cleanings and the hour he tested the clockwork. Wound full. 14 o'clock governor. Steady. His hand is not a calligrapher's hand. It is a hand that respects lines and gives them their due without decoration. Resupply comes in a clinker boat from the mainland. Oars double banked when tide sulks. The iron davits at the stations. Lee holds a block and Fowler hook lowers a sling for oil tins and canvas sacks of coal for the kitchen stove. The boat hooks on the keeper, walks the full hand over hand through a figure 8 on the cleat, letting weight talk without raising its voice. A boy in the boat knew. Raw-knuckled keeps his eyes on the davit foot and not on the horizon, which is how boys learn to avoid being scolded by their stomachs. A crate of new lamp chimneys comes up thin glass, each separated by straw. A label in tidy script. He signs the paper with a stump of pencil, returns the slate board that carried the list down last week. You can set your attention on the kettle while it sings on the iron plate, and nothing upstairs will misplace its duty. The lens will stand. The prisms will remember angles. The weight will wait. The book will dry its ink. Afternoon, paint. Where iron meets weather. Red lead undercoat speaks the language rust respects. A man in a rope chair swings outside. Bosun's chair not snug. Tail hitched back to the ring. Brush travel measured from left to right. Top to bottom. No pride in speed. Pride in not missing corners. He lays the undercoat in long, thin lines later. White over it, the white tells ships what the map already knew. He carries a pot covered with a lid, so the wind will not learn a taste for solids and steal them. Below, the assistant minding the tail line hums tunelessly, which keeps fingers from inventing mischief. Toward evening, weather starts to reconsider. A smear of grey stands on the sea's lip, its edges soft, a signal that favours patience. The keeper sends the assistant to test the bell once, just strokes. Half minute, halt. The note goes out along the surface with a silver that brass bells never quite master. It comes back, thinner rocks do that. He nods, counts the seconds, feels the governor take and release, takes his hands off the striker, because hands often teach machines bad habits if they stand too close. Back up the stair. The lamp is set for lighting. He checks the mantle spares in their paper pockets. Later years asked for vapor mantles. After wicks, this station still runs the concentric burners because spare parts and training weigh what they weigh, and no one has a quarrel with old reliability. Tonight, wick. A little alcohol priming tray sits unused and clean. The match tin clicks, the match flares, the flame licks the crown of wick. It becomes a ring that knows its width and its purpose. He lowers the chimney, the flame steadies, his hand finds the small wheel and lifts it a breath, so the flame grows without learning to smoke. He waits, watching his own breath slow in the lens reflection. Clockwork. The weight is unhooked from its rest. He pulls the chain with both hands and steps backward as the weight climbs within the shaft. It rises like a thought you have to work for and enjoy because you had to. At the top, he checks the dog on the ratchet, sets the governor's arm to the mark the inspector set last year, and listens. A faint run begins. Pins on a table strike pallets, the carriage turns. The lens walks its round. The room writes bright, dark, bright across the water. The flashes repeat on their count every 10 seconds here. Long so a man on a quarterdeck could wake from a doze and know which light kept him company without opening the book. If your mind slips and follows the beam across the water until it thins to a thread over a shoal, nothing will go wrong. The weight will descend 1 inch, then 1 inch, then 1. The governor will argue for calm, and when the burner will keep its ring, the prisms will resume their bargain with geometry. The fog bank reaches in, not rude, but decided. Down at the bell frame, the assistant sets the weight, the cam lifts the striker, the bell says its word, the governor keeps the space between the words clear and even. In thick milk the station also keeps a horn, a reed trumpet worked by a little hot air engine, and a compressor tonight is for the bell alone. The wine's temperature and the ice in the air telling men that sound from iron will travel cleaner than sound from air in a barrel. The keeper writes, bell begun 1910, clear note, and draws a small circle beside it that means remind the district later that the striker wants a new spring before winter. Symbols save sentences, and sentences save men from going up and down stairs to say the same thing to ways. Night joins the work. Lantern room becomes a slow carousel of light and shadow. When he leans out to look, the glass shows him a dozen small moons of the lamp, each bent into usefulness by a facet. He does not touch the glass when the lamp is lit. Heat and finger oils share a private conspiracy that ends with someone apologizing to a pain. He knows that apology. He chooses not to repeat it. Birds find the light in migration seasons. The station keeps screens and has learned the timing of turning the intensity lower in those nights when the sky is moving. Tonight only a single wing taps once on a rail and then thinks better of it. The keeper notes it and does not turn that note into a speech about fate. He is busy with the flame height and the weight and the new cloud that has learned the road to his island. At midnight, the assistant goes down and winds the clock. 7 minutes work every 2 hours. The chain pulled hand over hand, and the clack of the ratchet behind his shoulder, like a small polite metronome that knows how to teach shoulders. They are still shoulders. He tastes coffee that has lived on an iron plate too long and forgives it because coffee that lives forever is better than coffee that does not show up. If you doze a little, the light will keep your place. The flash will arrive where the flash ought to arrive. The bell will say its name without trying to make itself into a sermon. The book will not write in your sleep, it will wait. Toward dawn, the fog gives up the discussion. The bell stops after a last pair of strokes that sound relieved and slightly pleased with themselves, which is an illusion bells are entitled to. The keeper enters the lantern. The flame comes down by the thumbwheel. The wick smokes for 1 soft second. The chimney lifts the flame size out. The warm metal remembers work and then cools. He hangs a slip of tin over the burner, so air in the room will not wag a last ember into unhelpful life. He sets the lens still and lays the weight on its hook. Cleaning after use is as important as getting it lit. He waits for the burner to lose its temper, then removes the chimney and sets it with its sisters on the rack. He wipes the brass quietly. He empties any drop left in the fart back to a can, through a funnel. The book calls number 3, and his hands call the wide mouth. He trims the wick again, because wicks enjoy order. He goes around the glass with a dry chamois to tease away any film, saving whiting for the afternoon, when the sun will show flaws no lamp can. Downstairs, the kitchen wakes. Porridge in an iron pot. A square of butter learning to be a pool in the middle. A spoon laid across the rim to dissuade boilovers. Bread from yesterday's oven sits under a towel, so it will not learn to be a board. The assistant pours water from a bucket and sets a cup for the man from the boat who will come after the next tide with newspapers 2 days late and exactly as useful as if they were early. The log takes its last lines. Lamp out 4:31, weather easing visibility. Bird count 1 bell cease 3:10. A note, paint out a rail east face fog bell spring order. The keeper closes the book and sets its spine outward on the shelf, where hands learn to find it without looking. He steps out onto the gallery. leans forearms on the rail, and looks along the water. Today marks sure would lift their boards into the morning, repeating the lessons yesterday taught without tiring of their own voices. The light's blank daytime face reflects the sky, pretending to be a room with windows. Below, the iron frame of the bell keeps its place without applause. The day will bring the small things, a pane to check, a hinge to oil, a rope ladder to overhaul, a tinder box to refill, a line to throw to a boy who still looks at horizons when he should look at hooks, a cup to wash because cups never stay clean unless you make them. Summer will bring whitewash, winter will bring ice feathers on the landings and the sheepskin over the clerk's knees while he adds lines to lines. The light will turn because it turns. The book will tell it to tomorrow with the same number of words and the same number of little truths. The 11th part. Forest on 3 sides, a pond on the 4th, and at the center a low brick house with a roof that steams when frost gives up. The chimney speaks in a steady curl, the doors stand open enough to let night out, and not enough to let heat slip uninvited. Inside, the furnace shows a square of brightness through its mouth, white at the core, orange at the lip pots, nested in the heart like quiet moons. The floor is swept where feet turn, a drift of pale sand lives under a hopper at the batch table, cullet broken clean glass glitters in a barrel like hard water. The day begins at the batch. Measures live as boxes and shovels. 1 box silica sand, 1 shovel soda ash, a smaller scoop of limestone, 2 scoops cullet to help the melt remember how to be glass again. In an older corner, a sack labeled potash sits, the forest's gift from ash, used when recipes asked for different tempers. A pinch of manganese to tame green from iron, no cobalt today, no need to write blue into a jar, meant to show what it holds. Dry things become one thing under a shovel. The shovel leans, the clerk chalks a line on a board, pots are full and the numbers sit there without swagger. The parts glow through their own walls. Clay that once was mud has learned to keep secrets at heat. A man with a long-handled scoop opens the furnace door and feeds batch into a pot with the caution you use when pouring a letter into a narrow post slot, not a grain more than the throat accepts neat. The door shuts, iron clicking home, the noise of flame returns to a low, useful river. In the annealing leer along the wall, yesterday's work sits under a red patience. The leer is a tunnel like a slow thought, it cools glass, so it does not teach itself to crack later. Benches wait near the furnace mouth. Each has arms of wood worn to a shine where pipes roll. A block of fruit wood soaked in water, paddles dark with the same. A pad made of folded newspaper damp enough to steam. Jack's steel tongs shaped like long knuckles rest on a hook, shears, pincers, nippers each have a peg and each finds it again. The Marva and iron table holds the line a gather needs to turn from a ragged comet tail to a cylinder that minds itself. The gaffer takes a pipe from the rack and listens to its ring clean, true, and warms the tip in the furnace mouth until it forgets the night. He dips the tip into a pot and gathers a first skin of glass out to the Marva. Turning the pipe with a steady wrist, the skin evens back to the pot for a second, gather weight and glow and slow. The glass sits at honey, and then at thick honey he turns. The assistant blows on the back of his hand and nods ready. The gaffer brings the pipe to his lips and sends a breath down the ball. A small breath first, then another. The lump makes a bubble as if remembering childhood. He caps the end with his thumb to keep the breath inside and turns to keep heat where it belongs. The block wet fruitwood cups the gather steam hisses soft, not reproachful. The form rams. He sits, lays the pipe on the bench arms, unrolls, while the Marva's memory of straightness travels into the skin. The assistant servant attends, the glory hole door, the reheating flame waits to keep the skin mobile. They move between heat and bench to men moving between work and a counter that sells bread. Never hurrying, never losing position in a line the world understands. A bottle begins where a bubble admits it wishes to be a neck. The jacks slide along the turning skin and pinch a line that will make a separation. Later steel leaves a track and the track becomes a habit. The assistant brings a bit, another small gather on a pontiland, kisses it to the base of the blank. The bit becomes a foot when the shears teach it to. The gaffer shears the mouth free with a cut, and a knock the blank leaves the blowpipe now. It lives on the pontil punty held by a small cold kiss that will let go when told. The mouth reheats, softens, and turns to a lip under the jacks, a soft yet a little too, with a bellows mouth puffs the opening round. The last flare happens in a rotation that points like a compass and behaves like a slow wheel. The bottle seems finished before it is finished it glows, then dims the puncture scar where pontil meets base will be its only loudness, and even that grows quiet as years go over it. You can let your gaze drift to the lair's red interior, a while rows of yesterday's shapes cooling as if asleep among coals. Nothing at the bench will forget itself. Pipes will keep their slow turns, the glory hole will keep its narrow patience, a pad will steam and not complain. Windows belong to another bench. Forest glass went to pains by the old cylinder road. A long blowpipe, a longer breath the gaffer gathers, forms a perform, and then stands to swing. He steps onto the board set in the floor for this, lets the weight lengthen the bubble, keeps the swing in plane. The cylinder grows 4 feet, then longer, 10 inches across. He collars it, with a jack near each end. The assistant offers a second pontil, and a touch of water as a line. The glass opens to a crack at the wet place with a chime like a small bell. They lift the cylinder to a holster stands and carry it to a kill. Later, a split along its length diamond or hot iron, then a reheat until it remembers how to be a sheet, and paddles flatten it on an iron plate. It rests under the lair's patience until edges can be trimmed and a window can look through winter without making winter feel large. Not everything is clarity. A cooling shelf holds a run of greenish tumblers with tiny bubbles that no one minds because they catch the morning like a net and make it useful. A squat jar wears a ring of blue applied with a thin thread of glass that wound once and laid itself down obediently. Lamp chimneys in rows lift like quiet chimneys in miniature, the kind that let flame behave without smoke and without swagger. In a corner, a worker trails thin canes of color from a part where a bit of cobalt or copper has been allowed to teach glass a new mood. The canes cool and are cut later. They thread through clear and become an edge, a letter for the hand. Batch melts, glass clarifies, fines rise as bubbles, and a skim defining agent like saltpeter or arsenic in older days helped, now mistrusted and left behind when recipes grew kinder. The potman watches the melt through a peephole and reads the color the way millers read flour and water coming to dough, a spectrum of honesty. He journals the heat with a short pencil, cone near white, chords few. The furnace door shuts with its usual syllable. He touches a hinge with a drop of oil, because hinges near heat forget to mind themselves unless reminded, and then forgive you with a long career of not complaining. If you rest your eyes for a minute against the cool of the window frame, the pipe will keep its turning and the glass will keep its slow grammar. The bench and the flame have known each other long enough not to argue. The shop's sound is method rather than noise. Paddle on glass, a hush like a small wave under a dock. Jacks on a neck, a dry, decisive kiss. Shears cut a gather, a soft tink at the tail. A knock on the pipe to free a piece to the pontil. One measured touch. The lair's door, iron against brick. A note from the foreman, for the apothecary, narrow mouth. 2 thumbs height, no seed. No seed means fewer bubbles. The gaffer nods and leans the next bubble slightly longer to give a fold of time to fining. At midday, the glass throws white across the benches. The gaffer's sleeve shows a film of dust like flour, and his forearm shows the fine freckles heat writes when you work close and count careful. Lunch is a heel of bread, cheese the color of straw, a slice of cold fish that has known smoke kindly. A mug stands on the sill, it sweats a circle and refuses to apologize. Nobody scolds it. A boy turns a pipe on the rack end to end, so the next hand reaches neat length and balance. Not a surprise. Afternoon brings a run of jars with ground stoppers. After the glass leaves the leer, a man sets a rough stone wheel turning at a stream of water and holds the mouth to the stone to make it flat, true, and square. He holds stopper blanks to another wheel until they find their mates. A third wheel carries emery and sings its own little rain. Two marks are made with a needle at the edge of each pair, so they will remember each other in the cupboard years hence. One near a scratch becomes one near a scratch, always. Narrow work, wide use. There is also ornament work, but it is the kind that keeps modesty. A bowl receives a band of wheel cut cross hatching so fruit will feel that it is being carried and not merely stored. A small jug gets a pulled lip that will treat milk with kindness and not throw it. A window disc for a cottage door shows a pontil mark bright in the center that says, "We made this with hands." No one in this room finds that romantic, they find it true. Toward evening, the furnace mouths more yellow than white. The gaffer chooses his last bottle for the day and makes it a thick one that will keep densities honest when the last wind comes. He sets it in the leer with the others. The leer door closes and leaves a line of red behind it, the way a setting iron is a line under a board. The book takes 3 lines, jars 36, bottles 24, chimneys 18, and the foreman adds a 4th. Windows 3 sheets, fair. He underlines fair lightly. It is praise enough. In a side room, a man grinds pigment from a roasted ore and a wisp of something that knows red intimately. Linseed oil boils in a pot, the way a small river boils around a rock. He stirs until a brush on a test board draws a line that hides wood in one pass and promises whether that it will meet it calmly. That paint will live on a door tomorrow, the door will bend the rain's mind. If sleep reaches you here, it will find the furnace upholding its end of the bargain and the leer walking its slow corridor. Things that are meant to cool will cool. Things that are meant to wait will wait. Night rules quickly in a glass house because light was paid for all day and now must be paid for again if you keep it. The foreman banks heat to hold the pots, not to brag. A door near the annealer opens. For a minute warm air lifts up and out, and everyone silently approves. The pond outside throws a faint mirror of the red rectangle on the leer door. Amorth remembers a plan, thinks better of it, and goes to the window, where the world is cooler and forgiving. Tools go back where they go. Pipes in their rack with heads toward a corner, so feet will not learn them by accident. Jacks wiped with an oily rag so steel remembers to be smooth. Blocks put to soak for a last look to see if the fruit would begin to crack apart. A cracked block is a liar and not invited back. The marver gets a water wipe, the bench arms learn to cool. The clerk closes the book with the same pressure he used to open it and sets the pencil in the groove it has made over years. When a place holds a groove for a pencil, you can trust the rest of its promises. In the morning, there will be an early run at the flattening plate. The sheet from the cylinder will open like bread from a tin and lie politely under paddles that do not threaten. The cutter will use a diamond or a steel wheel. Newer run along a straight edge. The crack will follow the scratch with a noise between a song and an idea. Squares will stack with paper between. Someone will load a cart, and the cart will find a road, and the road will find a cottage whose door has been lonely too long. A pane will set into putty, and suddenly the room will have a place where weather shows its face without forcing an introduction. A last glance around. Furnace mouths get their iron plugs. The leer keeps its glimmer. The iron table breathes its day. Heat away. The floor holds tracks that tell a story of circles and straight lines. A coat on a peg smells like smoke and oil on work, and the small bravery of standing near heat 4 hours in order to give shape to something that the world thought was going to be a rock forever. The pond outside tries the stars on its surface and decides to keep only a few. The rest go back to the sky as if nothing happened. Sleep will have no trouble here. Everything is put away in the place it can be found again. The leer keeps the slow clock. The furnace keeps the deep one. The door knows how to close without scolding the latch. Morning knows where to find what it needs. The 12th part. Morning lifts straight out of the reeds. The canal is a long, patient cut through pasture and pine. A green lane for water, with a towpath on one side where hoof prints dry 2 small ovals. At the locker keeper's cottage sits low whitewash, green door, a bell hung under the eave. The chamber is dressed in dressed stone, arras softened by years of rope. On the upper sill two mitre gates lean shut like hands at prayer on the lower sill. Another pair waits for the level to speak. Balance beams reach out from the gate arms-long timbers with iron shoes, so a person can push a door that weighs more than an ox and make it seem like manners rather than muscle. The morning smells of wet oak, tarred rope, and a little bread from the cottage oven. The keeper walks the coping with a gauge staff marked in black. He lowers it to the water on the upper pound, runs a thumb along the wet, and notes the number against a page pinned to a board. Upper, 5, and to lower, 3 and 9. The difference is the day's work cut into 2 figures. He oil cans the pintles. Where iron meets oak, he rubs a bar of tallow along the heel posts, so wood and water will go on speaking politely. A windlass crank with a square socket hangs on a hook by the sluice. The socket fits the spindle of the paddle gear. The gear lifts a gate's little door wicket. Paddle so water can do the talking, a gate should not. The keeper touches the gear teeth with a rag, and the spot of grease. Old locks survive on small kindnesses. A boat comes along the towpath side with the sound of rope, remembering why it is rope. The horse moves with a steady hip, collar padded. Traced to the bridle bar on a small tow mast, the line runs to a fair lead at the bow, through a ring that wears a shine. The skipper stands at the tiller, one hand, eyes on the bank. He glances at the depth board white plank with black marks, each decimeter a quiet promise. The boat's draft boards at the forefoot show 1 point past a mark. The keeper knows there will be no drama. A boy on the foredeck coils slack with a patience that will make him quick later without his ever seeming to hurry. Hold up at the marker. The keeper calls in a voice that has no edges. The boy drops the horse line from the towmast to the deck. The horse is led to the post outside the cottage, where oats live in a pail. The boat glides under her own small way and kisses the top gates. Fenders talk to oak with a little warm squeak. The skipper hands a line ashore. The keeper turns it once on a bollard, and back to the boat. Never a hard belay. Water prefers to negotiate. He puts the windlass on the upper paddle spindle. 2 turns. Water rises through the culvert in the gate, and under the surface the lock cauldrons eddy as the level equalizes. The boat shifts a thumb. The boy takes a turn. No voices lift. Another 2 turns. The flow speaks louder and then softens to a hum. The miters loosen their grip. The keeper swings a balance beam, walking toward the heel post with his body leaning into the timber as if finishing a sentence. The gate opens on a quiet hinge. Iron dogs on the coin brushing their sockets, the way you brush a door jamb in a kitchen, blind. The second gate follows. The keeper sets them back against their check posts with a single touch to tell them to stay. Come ahead. And the boat slides into the chamber. Amidships, a line goes ashore. The boy dips the fore line to a bollard and keeps it live in his hand. The keeper closes the gates with the same simple grammar he used to open them. He lays the windlass on the lower paddle spindle and looks once at the skipper's face. The skipper nods, slow. The keeper lifts the paddle 2 turns. Water leans out under the gate. Down into the tail, the level inside the lock begins to go from the higher mooring to the lower. The boat settles on its fenders with the authority of something that has practiced being heavy. The boy feeds a little line. The skipper eases the tiller against the wall so the rudder will learn patience. If you rest your eyes on the beam's grain or the way rope has polished a stone corner, nothing will misplace itself. The paddles will keep their half-turns. The water will keep the count. The hull will go on reminding wood and iron that weight can be decent. The keeper works the paddles in measures. 2 turns. Listen, 2 turns. Talk, pause. He watches the boat's movement, not just the water's voice. To quick, and the stern drifts to slow, and the morning chooses to grow long. He knows where the culverts live, the side culverts in this cut, not through the gate sand, where the eddies prefer to argue. He throws a skimming look at the mooring line's angle, and adjusts his half-turns, so strain lives in rope like a good opinion, not like a shout. The chamber falls a hand, then a foot. Green scum that had settled on stone last week rises from a ledge in a pattern that says it will let go as soon as sun comes to that wall. A water spider tries to choose and then lets the air pick for it. The horse stamps once at a fly and then remembers winter asked him to be courteous first. On the cottage sill, the keeper's wife turns a loaf from a tin and tips it with the tip of a knife. It answers with a hollow, honest sound. She smiles at the sound, because it is the sound she meant. When the bubble level on the coping shows the chamber's surface and the lower pound's surface are near enough to be siblings, the keeper drops the windlass a quarter and the paddle stops. He walks to the balance beams of the tailgates and puts his palm on the timber. The grain is a little warm in the sun. His hand takes that with a small approval. He leans a shoulder and the gates part to a soft V. Water slips forward, then stops, agreeable. Out you go. And the skipper lifts the tiller and nudges the boat's head into the V. The boy takes up the fall line without letting it learn a new hobby. The boat slips into the lower reach like a remark that doesn't need a reply. The keeper closes the gates with the same weight he has used for 40 years and the same lack of ceremony. He walks the towpath side and sets the upper paddles a single turn open to keep the reach in healthsome mornings. The canal likes a little flow to remind Reeds who tends the place. He notes in his board, down 52 to 39 past 1 grain horse, bay rope fair. You can sit on the coping and let your mind wander to the far end of the strait where heat shakes lightly above water and still be in step with this. The next boat will come when it comes. Water does not keep an angry schedule. Upstream a flight begins 3 locks in stair, each with side pounds, the staircase the district's pride, since the day men cut through clay and rock with picks and made earth decide to help them move flour instead of arguing with them at fords. A capstan stands at the middle pound, the post carries scars, where bars have learned to go in the same holes, in the same order. When a timber gate sticks, the ones in the middle flight like to know you still respect them. To men insert bars into the capstan head and lean as if persuading furniture. The gate remembers humility and moves. A boy walks the tow line forward pole by pole, lifting it over bollards and leaving it where it won't find a friend to tangle with. The lock flight uses side ponds to save water. Each pond is a dish of spare kept at its own level. When a lock lowers, part goes to the tail and part to a side pond through a culvert that's opened with a rack and pinion. Iron pinions turn cogs boards. Slide water chooses a new room to visit for a while. Later, when raising, water returns from pond to chamber, and everyone avoids the waste of sending the whole gift downriver. The keeper controls it with a row of iron cranks. Along the coping, a small organ each is marked with a number stamped when his grandfather still used another kind of hat. He oils the stems once a week, 2 drops per stem. Any more and dust will have opinions. A packet boat arrives at the lower reach low cabin. Neat paint, windows curtained for privacy. In earlier years this boat carried letters and people. Now it carries people and their care for baggage, while letters have learned to fly by wire, along poles that stride the horizon. The packet still keeps the old courtesy. The skipper carries a horn, but almost never blows it. He prefers a bell, 1 note, when he wants the keeper's eyes to find him. 2, if he wants to confess a hurry that is not his fault. He does neither today. The keeper has already set the paddles and walked the beams, as if he were reading a psalm he admires, but never recites to prove he admires it. The packet's passengers stand and sit in the foreshade. A woman with a hat that is practical watches the gate swing and sets her book aside by marking it with a ribbon that knows its job. A man with a case uses a pocket knife to cut an apple in 4 and shares 2 quarters with someone who is not asked. A child looks at the paddle gear and sees that things move because other things move. He will remember that when someone later tries to explain the world to him with words that like to brag. Midday, the keeper's wife brings a pot with boiled potatoes speckled with dill and a plate with herring that has learned vinegar. She sets them on the table outside the cottage because the day asks to be eaten in the air. The keeper keeps half an eye on the reach. He knows the telltales of vibration in the line between horse and boat when someone new to towing tries to talk the horse into running, the noise a thin plank makes when a boy uses it as a drum near a lock he doesn't understand yet. The way the top gate shifts in the hinge, Illa Timber is thinking about asking for a wedge. He eats with the same ease he opens a paddle. Enough, not more. Doze if you want. The chamber will fall to where it needs. The beam will close, the horse will step, the horn will not call anything rude. Afternoon brings a freighter of timber, rough sawn planks stacked by measure, stickers between 4 air, a stamp on end grain that tells the mill's name to anyone who knows letters and tells the wood's promise to anyone who knows hands. The skipper takes the turn slow. The keeper walks with him and talks about the wind on the upper pound, where Poplar gives a little trouble at the bend after equinox. They tie fore and aft with long, low lines, never tight, and talk with their hands more than their mouths. The paddles rise 3 turns, pause, 3 more, the stern slides a foot off and comes back as if remembering what it had gone to get. A wedge of old fender wood keeps the rudder from visiting the wall in a way that would cause future chores. On the far side of the cottage, a small workshop holds the lock's tools. A crate of oak wedges cut with the grain, a draw knife, whose handles have learned to generations, a box of iron cheeks for paddle gear that the district smith shapes when asked kindly, a spare heel post shoe. On a shelf, a pot of red ochre mixed with oil, the same red that kept the lock beams honest in rains 2 summers ago. The keeper touches the pot with a finger, so small a fly would be embarrassed. He smears a pinhead of red on a splintered place where a boot's hobnail spoke out of turn earlier. The splinter forgets to be a splinter. A chart tacked inside the door of the workshop shows the canal from sea to lake and river to river, numbers at each lock, full feet inches, chamber length, seal depth at low water. In one corner someone penciled a habit. Open 2 count 6, open 2 count 6. The habit is more true than any printed line, paper, ink, and rain know this differently, but equally. The keeper knows it with his fingers. Down the reach a swing bridge sits on a pier. Its deck balanced, so a single man with a long bar can rock it open. The bridge keeper wears a cap like the lock keepers and a key on his belt that opens the cabinet where the turnbar sleeps. A boat stands off away while a car crosses, then the bar goes in. The bridge floats off its heel, or a ring of iron shot, and the channel clears the width of a hull and a polite margin. Men lift, not to show, but because work responds to hands that have learned to ask. A squall shoulders through around 4. The keeper lowers a canvas in front of the cottage door and flicks 2 drops of rain from a ledger page before they decide to be blocked. The horse turns his rump to the weather and accepts the coat someone offers him without comment. The boat in the chamber, caught mid-drop, leans into a fender and relaxes when the wind remembers it is not in charge of the canal. The keeper runs the windlass another single, measured turn, and keeps everything tidy as if the squall were a neighbour stepping into the yard to borrow a catch of fire from a coal and returning it with thanks. In winter, this lock grows a winter skin. Stanchions slot into recesses and bare boards that hold a timber floor a little above water. Men shovel snow from that floor so it does not become a slope sheet. If the canal sleeps with ice, the keeper drops a chain of spruce boughs into the chamber to keep water from thinking the lock is a place for a lid. The boughs jog the surface under the crust and make small trouble for ice that would like to be large. He knows where to break a lane with a chisel, so a boat with a short iron bow can nose through on the morning, do a night with a quiet, bright cruelty. Wardens come twice a year and look at numbers in books and numbers in wood. They nod at the keeper's pintle wheeling habit and tell him how a different district did a different thing, and then admit that they might be mistaken. He makes tea for them and gives them bread and talks about a capstan tooth that wants a lover. He will get the smith to make that tooth in 2 weeks, and the wardens know that without asking, because the keeper's door hinges do not squeal. If your mind slides to the notch on the windlass handle where a hand older than any here wore the wood smooth, let it. The handle will still be there when you return to the room. The notch will not move, the paddle will not rush. Boats will keep arriving with cargo, and with nothing but a wish to see a different stretch of hedge. Evening. The last boat through wears lamps fore and aft toil. Thin flame steady inside glass chimneys that don't care to be admired. The light keeps moths occupied long enough that the skipper can drink his coffee instead of explaining to a child why light attracts. The gates close, the keeper opens and lowers, the chamber empties to the tail. The lower beams swing. Safe water. And the boat slides out with a sound like a coat sleeve brushed once by a hand that likes the person in the coat. He sets the paddles all too closed and locks the windlass on its hook. He chalks the day on the board lines, not speeches. 12 boats timber, grain, To pack its horse teams 5 squalls small. He adds a dot where a bigger man would add a flourish. The dot is enough. He covers the gauge staff with a bit of canvas, so son tomorrow doesn't practice lies on the paint. He coils a short line and lays it where the next hand expects it. He pushes the balance beam once, with no gate attached, and feels in his shoulder the exact memory of the weight that will return at first light. Night folds the canal into a strip of slow ink. The towpath shows to thin lines, where a cart passed at dusk and never minded anyone. In the cottage, the bread sets on a rack and talks to itself in tiny cracks. A kettle lifts a lid and puts it back down with the sweet sound iron makes when it forgives a room for being cooler than it was earlier. The horse stamps once and goes quiet. A morph drafts itself into a corner and remembers that a day can be good without the morph knowing why. Tomorrow the numbers will change and the words will stay almost the same. The beam will swing, a little lifted with tallow, and not ask for thanks. The water will step down and step up. A boy will coil a line and think about a turn he did not have to take back again. A woman will cut bread thick at noon. A skipper will tap a fender with his boot and smile at the sound. Quiet work, visible results. A day invited to end intact. The 13th part. At the edge of the pine wood, the ground dips to a shallow bowl lined long ago with clay. A gutter of birch runs from the bowl's lowest lip to a small iron spout, hammered into the side of a stone-lined hole core, shadowed, lidded with a plank. Around the bowl, billets of resin-rich heartwood lie in ranks, split to hand-breadth fatwood that remembers lightning without the drama. The men call this place the tar pit, though it is more a patient funnel. A rake of green branches leans against a stump. A shovel has its blade sunk an inch into sand, so some won't teach the handle to split a wooden mallet. Sits on the plank lid like a benign guard. They stack the billets, but ends toward the center, tips outward. In a low, tight cone, each piece leans with its neighbors. Help voids are small and deliberate. A layer of turf goes over, green down, brown up, each strip lapped like shingles, seam over seam, until wood lives under grass and air must make 4 more requests to enter. A funnel of sticks keeps a central shaft open from the crown to the bowl. The keeper drops a coal into the throat and covers it until smoke shows you how it intends to act today. It will not be a fire, it will be a persuasion. Heat distills resin into tar, vapor into pitch-smelling breath. The smoke climbs in a pale column at first, then learns to bend to a breeze no one feels on their face. The keeper tips the plank from the stone hole and places a small bucket under the iron spout. It will receive more than it deserves if all goes well. A book with stains like a map sits in a pocket. The keeper notes the time, wind, and the color of smoke with small words, light, then grey wester hand. He walks the rim with a short forked stick and a basket of turf, where smoke crowds the green skin. The fork opens a pinhole where a dark tongue tries to teach flame. Turf pats it out with the calm authority of a good apron. There is a way to stand near a tar pit, feet planted, eyes half-lidded, one hand resting on the hip, though to look official, but to keep the habit of not rushing. The men nearby copy the shape without knowing that's what they are doing. Beneath the turf, the heartwood learns to be something else. Resin liquefies, runs down through clay, and falls into the gutter. The iron spout gives up a first slow drop, then a thin thread, then a steady line as the bowl heats through. The tar glows amber at the lip, then slumps into brown in the pail. The keeper skims a pine needle from the surface with a twig and flicks it back to the earth. He slides the pail aside, sets another beneath, and corks the first with a whittle peg. The cork turns dark at the edges, a sure sign of a seal. In a day, 5, 7, sometimes 10 such pails will visit this corner of stone like quiet guests. Later they will decant to barrels oak hoops, tight staves, bung in the head, each barrel branded with a mark that tells a ship's man where this smell learned its manners. You can let your eyes rest on the way the turf darkens in ovals and forget a minute of the day. The smoke will keep its agreements. The spout will keep its slow speech. The clay will go on being useful in the old way that makes tools forget how new they once were. Along the lane, the rope walk runs like a thin, straight field. One end stands under a shed with a beam high enough to hook a man off his feet. If he wasn't paying attention, the other end disappears in a little house with a window that squints at the sea. Between, a flat, hard path holds footprints and wheel marks with the attitude of writing that refuses to fade. At the head, a row of spindles, each with a forged hook, stands on a frame at the tail. A traveller, a small carriage on flanged wheels, carries a set of hooks on a crossbar and a cone of wood called the top. The traveller rolls free. A boy oils the axles with a feather dipped in a pot, so the wheels know their role, but never learn to talk. Hemp lies in hanks on a bench under the shed-line flax, pale as straw, and a darker run of manila that came in bales from farther seas. The dressing stove stands to one side, a low iron pan where tar and a little pine oil warm until they stir when you nod at them. The man at the bench draws a handful of fibres through a heckler comb with iron teeth set in a bed long strokes, then shorter, teasing out the short from the long. The long line goes to rope the short toe will find a future as oakum or twine. He weighs the handful in his palm. Without scales, he has weighed handfuls for 30 years. His hand knows what a strand needs. Yarns first, the spinners take their bunches and walk backward from the head, laying fibres to the hook, twist beginning as the handle turns. The hook spins fibre becomes yarn, by agreeing to live in a spiral. 4 yarns to the strand today, 3-4 smaller. The foreman calls the lay right to left or left to right. Old habit made careful, because men have twisted lines wrong, and then pretended they had not. Each spinner keeps the yarn under a tar rag, just a kiss of warm tar, through a fold of cloth so fibres lay down their fly, and the weather later will not pull them apart, one hair at a time. The smell around the pan is not smoke, it is the smell of ship repair at low tide, and spring rigging snugged after thaw. It is not loud, but it fills a chest like a remembered song. When yarns have length enough, they gather to the top. The traveller begins to move toward the head. The men at the frame keep turns, even the top rides the bight, and lays the strands around each other. Twist right in the yarn, left in the strand, left in the yarn, right in the strand, according to the size and the use the beer named in the book: halyard, sheet, messenger, mooring. The coil grows behind the traveller in an even snake. A gauge slides along once in a while to read diameter. If it reads shy, the foreman tells a man to feed another thread along into the yarn. If it reads proud, he tells the spin to ease. He says it once men hear it, the rope hears it. At the head end a crank clacks, at the tail wheels roll halfway, and a man walks with a tar paddle and dresses the turning line with the lightest of brushes. He hums because the day is long, and humming keeps steps neat. A cat that belongs to no one walks the rope walk like a magistrate, with opinions about small animals. The traveller runs the length. The top comes off. The rope is served wrapped with small tarred twine, for chafe if it will live as a stay or a place where iron likes to make its opinions known. The serving machine stands like a little wheelbarrow. With a spindle a boy turns the handle, twine wraps with the rhythm of a man wrapping a memory he means to keep dry. If your thoughts wander while the traveller rolls away, let them. Hooks will keep their turn. The yarn will not leap loose if you admire the shape of a cloud instead of the shape of a lay. Tar will stay warm long enough without being coaxed by a stare. In the afternoon, a small order. Cod nets for the outer scaries. The mender brings a bench into the yard where light is kind, a netting needle wooden, loaded with twine, but a smell tar enough to remember rests in a palm, a gauge flat stick, to fingers wide rides under the hand to keep mesh honest. The mender anchors the first row to a head rope stretched between 2 pegs. The head rope carries cork floats, at measured intervals, cork cut from bottle-sized discs and board, or bark rolled from birch and taught to float like a promise. The bottom rope, the lead line, will carry soft leads wrapped in cloth and a jacket of twine, so they won't bruise their neighbours. Knot by knot the mesh grows. Needle behind the gauge, twine down and around, a turn under the thumb, a firm pull to seat the knot, just so the next and the next, until a square becomes a line, becomes a fabric that knows the sea, that doesn't argue with it. He joins one panel to another with a fisherman's join that looks like nothing and behaves like faith. He stops and looks across. As light shifts, he sees a place where a mesh has gone proud and catches it in time to teach it humility. He does not count, his hands hold the count, and his eyes keep the gauge weights. A child asks why the needles are shaped like boats. The mender says, so they can pass through without getting lost, which is exactly the truth, with or without poetry. Behind the rope walk, a yard where coils rest, small, big, greased, bare. Each coil bears a tag of scrap oak with a charcoal mark to numbers and a letter diameter, length, lay. The coils learn to be shy about sun and rain. A tarp goes over the row that faces west. A pail stands upside down over a hook on a stanchion, so water will not build a neighborhood in it. The foreman writes in a book, 7 coils hawser, served for messenger, like 10 cod nets, head and foot roped. He keeps a stub of pencil in a pocket and a string at its end, because pencils without strings behave like fish without a hook. Evening brings the tar man back with his barrels in a sled with narrow runners shod in iron. He pries the bung, peers at the surface in the tilt of light, and smiles at a sheen that says good. A small board with a whole funnel rides in his hand. Tar threads through into a storage barrel where it will sit until men with boats ask it to come back to work. He draws a cup on a stick and wipes it along the spar that will go to a mast. The grain goes dark and then shines. The smell says, winter will be fair on this, and winter listens. At the harbour, this same tar will meet canvas. A sailmaker lays a bolt of flax cloth across the bench and drags a palm across it, the way he drags palm across his brow sometimes when sun takes trouble. He rubs a rag with tar along the leech of a sail before he lays in the rope, so chafe will learn it has company if it intends to visit. He threads the rope into the hem bolt rope stitches with a needle through 3 plies and the rope down and up, a rhythm a brain can walk beside as it wanders. Later, on a deck, men will slush a mast grease, tar, and a bit of oil on the wood under the shrouds, so the stays won't saw the mast when wind grows uncivil. Rope, wood, cloth, tar for friends who don't try to be grand about it. A fisherman tests a new line. He coils it in the hand, flings it across the yard in a loop that lands like a polite ring around a peg, and grins in the way fishermen grin when things are as they should be and no one needs to clap. He lifts a net panel and holds it against the light, admiring not beauty, but justice, square meshes that do not lie about their size. He touches a knot with a thick finger tight, but not mean. He hangs afloat under lead, ties both with a knot that is easy to untie in a cold rain, because a cold rain has opinions. He says, almost to the net, we'll see you tomorrow before dawn, and the net keeps its silence, which is a good omen. If you let your attention settle like a coil finds its own rest, you won't miss anything that matters. The rope will be where you left it. The tar will be warm but not hot. The pit will breathe the same slow breath. Sometimes the rope walk lays wire rope iron strands twisted, where hemp would go when the job calls for a weight. Neither hemp nor or manila can answer without complaint. The machine for that stands in its own shed, hooked to a lined shaft that remembers water turning a wheel up the brook. Today, in the old way, plant fiber rules. A travelling sailor in from a bark that loaded timber up the river runs his thumb along a hawser and nods in the manner of men who judge without noise. He orders a coil for the after falls and a hawser lead line for sounding in narrow water, a nice old luxury, hawser, but it speaks quickly to fingers when a lead finds bottom. The book grows a line and the foreman chalks a mark on the beam, so the coil will be remembered in motion as well as at rest. Toward dusk, the keeper at the tar pit drops the turf in thicker quilts. Smoke thins, the iron spout drips, only interval. He taps the turf with his fork, not because the turf needs tapping, but because you learn things with the fork head you cannot learn with your eyes. At last, he draws the plank across the barrel hole, sets the mallet on it, and ties a rag around the spout to keep flies from inventing a season in the mouth. He writes closed with his nail on a chip of pine and tucks it under the plank, if he were leaving a letter for a careful thief. Tomorrow, he will lift the skin, rake out the char, the free burned wood that gave what it had, save it 4 hearths that like a fire that starts cheerful and ends humble. He will clean the clay channel, patch 2 small cracks, and set the fork back in its place with the tines down. Near the rope walk's tail a bench holds tools that are their own small company. Fids of boxwood for teasing rope apart kindly, a marlin spike with a shank polished by hands, a sow-maker's palm hung by its leather thong, a hammer only used to persuade stubborn seizings to adopt new ideas, a tin of tallow for needle points and cork bungs. A boy learns what the tools are called and then learns what they are for, which are not always the same lesson on the same day. He picks up a fid and pushes it through a later. Quickly it snags. A man says, "Let the rope tell you." It will, which is enough instruction for most roads anybody worth keeping will travel. Night comes with the smell of resin still in the air and a black line of forest, like a theorem solved long ago. Coils on the racks find their small shadows. Nets hang on pegs, a wall of squares, quiet as a corral after the last note. The tar pan's lid shines a round reflection of a star, and then loses it to a cloud that wanted the same star. The traveler rests at the tail, hooked by one wheel so gravity won't teach it to wander. The cat sits under the dressing bench and pretends not to mind when a moth does exactly what moths always propose to do, and then doesn't. Tomorrow the rope walk will hum again, a low, agreeable string across the morning. A halyard will form, and the man will think of a masthead he stood under last summer. The tar pit will warm and give a barrel, will fill a hand, will leave a thumbprint on a bung and refuse to wipe it off, the best signature a man can leave on an honest thing. The nets will receive another 10 meshes across and 5 down. A boat will slide off the ways under the hands of 2 men and a boy, and the new line will run through a fair lead with the modest confidence of something that was born to this. We count what holds the coast together when the wind gets ideas. Rope that doesn't lie about its size, tar that keeps errors from spreading, nets whose knots know which way to face. The habit of turning a crank the same 200 turns without losing a beat. Not heroic things, just true ones. A person can rest with those. The 14th part. The shed by the quay keeps its own weather. Inside, the cooper's bench faces a window that remembers to keep salt out but light in. Staves stand upright in a ring like tall, narrow people waiting their turn to speak. Hoops hang from pegs, thin willow for setting, thicker iron for truth. On the bench lie tools that have learned to be quiet even when they work: compass, sun plane, hollowing knife, driver, and the crows that cuts a groove inside a cask so the head will sit and not argue later. He starts with a raising. Staves, tapered edge to edge, are brought together inside a raising hoop. He sets the first, then the second across it, then the third, working round until the circle closes and stands on its own. The staves lean inward above the hoop gaps show where curves need convincing. He sets the temporary hoop lower and taps with a mallet until wood learns to meet wood. He sides the bilge the belly of the barrel and nods when it looks like water would nod at the shape. The floor under the ring wears a dark circle from 100 raisings that ended with a barrel and not a puzzle. Heat teaches curve without cruelty. He lights a small brazier and stands the raised staves over it like a skirt on a frame. A drip pan keeps flame from inventing a story one wants to hear. Water in a kettle stands ready. He turns a rope windlass around the staves and cranks the rope, draws the tops closer as heat makes the wood willing. Now and then he tosses a cup of water onto the inside face. His steam rises, not a shout, just the talk of heat and patience. The rope comes in another inch, the setting hoop drops, a second hoop follows under the first, the waist comes true. He taps the hoop down with a driver iron on iron. Measured strokes and the shell becomes a barrel in the way a sketch becomes a drawing when the right line lands in the right place. He trims the chime with a sun plane, shaving the rim even, turning the barrel under his hand. The crows comes next, a ring-shaped plane with a spur that cuts a groove inside. One hand on the handle, one on the guide. The crow sings a shallow, regular note as the groove circles around at a distance that head and hoop understand. He stops and checks depth with a slender gauge, one hair more here, one less there. The groove meets itself without a bump the way a good path meets itself on the far side of a hill. Head making. He chooses quartered boards, lays them tight across a horseshoe form, draws a compass, and marks a circle. Dowels pin the boards, a draw knife rounds the edge, a chamfer eases the entry. He rubs a bit of tallow along the bevel, the head will slide where it is asked without learning rudeness. He sets the head into the crow's groove, taps the staves with a mallet until each accepts the head, and drops a hoop behind it to say stay. Then the other end, same song, new verse, final hoop sighing go on, the mallet speaking in a tone that fits the room. He sets the bung stave with its hole. He makes the bung with a small taper and a promise to fit later, not now. If your eyes rest for a moment on the curl from the sun plane, or the way the crows leaves a neat ring of dust that catches light, no part of this will miss you. The hoop will keep crawling to its seat. The head will keep learning the groove. Beyond the door, the packing loft waits. Floors are strewn with salt, as if winter liked to visit, and then learn to behave. Herrings sit in tubs of brine, eyes cleared, gills out, bellies cleaned with a two-stroke cut that women do, as if they were tidying a table after supper. Knives narrow and honest, a board with a lip so fish don't act brave and slide away. A tub for innards that will find a use later, none of us need to argue over. A water barrel stands with a dipper that is only for water and knows its assignment. Barrels come in from the cooper, mouths open like quiet questions. The packers dust them with dry salt, then lay a first course fish head to tail in a neat star. Flesh against stave, skin out. Salt sings out of a wooden scoop and lays a thin drift over the flesh. A second course turns, tails where heads were, evening the circle and making sure future movement won't teach the barrel to lean. Salt again. Course by course the barrel climbs with fish and white. A man with a boot on the hoop treads the pack down with a slow press, not to be cruel, to find spaces no hand can see. The press does the rest. A screw runs down from a head beam, a round follows the round, sits on the fish, the screw turns and the brine rises. They set the round at the right height and lay a bar across, so nothing will forget itself in the first night when salt pulls out what it must. The next day, the bar lifts, a next course goes on. The brine tests the hoop, and a bung learns to keep a secret, the lid perhaps temporary, until shipment goes in under one hoop, with an ease no one brags about, because bragging is no help to hoops and harms quiet. Hooks ring softly as they lift full barrels onto handcarts. A chalk mark on the chine writes a code for weight, and grade another mark from the controller in a peaked cap writes a letter for good enough to stand for us in another country's mouth. The mark matters because a mark carries time. The packers lean back and stretch wrists, salt stings small nicks, and teach his hands to keep track of where they live. If you drift a little, the salt will go on being salt, and the fish will stack themselves into a round argument no ship can undo. The screw will keep a line of brine honest. The barrel head will not lift unless asked to, and then only until it learns to sit again. At the key are scale weights with cast iron weights that wear figures deep enough to survive a century of fingers. A crane with a wooden jib and iron strap swings. The hook carries a strop around a cask to mend steady the bilge, and the head with palms the beam settles. The weigher writes a figure in the ledger with a pencil sharpened with a knife. He won't use full rope or lunch. The ledger pages show lines from springs ago and names from winters no one mentions unless wind is high, and someone needs to remember why it matters that a hoop sits true. A cooper's mark goes in hot. He heats an iron die in a brazier, lifts it with tongs, makes sure the mark faces right, and presses it to the stave beside the bung. It leaves a neat dark sign that tells a beer in Hamburg or Hull or farther that this barrel was made and packed by hands that consider a mark a promise and not an alibi. Once in a while, a hoop needs a wedge, small oak driven between hoop and stave to tighten the weld. He sets the wedge with a tap and listens for the pitch that says enough. Up the pier, a boatload of salt comes from the kedge that just tied at the outer posts. Blocks creak, sacks slide onto shoulders, a line of backs carries salt into the shed. The salt shed smells like the sea when it pretends to be dry. Boards are lined with tar where salt would prefer to make friends. The tar remembers and declines. A boy opens a sack with a knife he earnestly calls mine, and a man lets him, because a boy with a knife unrolls is better than a boy who finds a knife without them. The boy tips salt into a bean and smooths it with the flat of his hand, which is not needed, but some gestures are kept for their own good. In a corner, someone sets heads for ivriga word the buyers like for eager brine, while another sets vag gentler brine for a carrier without much ice house. They write little letters near the bung. The packlists like to argue which sells better. The packers like to argue which are kinder to open later without a knife making a scene. The arguments are quiet. They end with work. Across the lane, more wood. A stave pile covered with boards and stones, so rain will learn to run off a hoop barrel, for iron hoops that prefer to sit a frame, where a man straightens a twisted hoop with heat and a wrench, because iron sometimes remembers too much about yesterday and needs to be taught about today. He works without complaint and without being hurried. The way people work when they have learned that hurrying turns one job into two. Along the quays wall, a cooper's drawers a bench with a foot clamp holds a stave, while a companion rounds a long edge with a spoke shave, so that the outside of the cask will run even when rolled, not jerk in little hops that spill brine and shame hands. He runs the shave with both thumbs on the back of the blade and draws breath with each long curl, as if curls were a measure of air. The stave learns to be fair across its length. He tests with a long straight bar and nods. The straight bar goes back on the peg and waits for its next chance to be consulted without being flattered. If your attention slides to the water and how it slaps the pier blocks with a small, repeated promise, let it. The weight will drop to its mark. The pencil will write the same number it would have written if you had watched it. The crane will swing and not scold. The pack house does not live on herring alone. On a rack, cod hang by their tails like little pale doors, drying in the clean wind. Stockfish will have their day later. Today the rags teach shade to be a worker, not an ornament. A woman walks under and puts her palm up to feel if air still runs through. She nods when it does. In a tub, roast salt separately later. They will speak another language in a different kitchen. A boy counts barrels down the row and stops at 30, because 30 is enough to tell him the day made progress. By mid-afternoon, the cooper returns to a cask he raised in the morning. He checks for seep. Damp dark at a stave seam would ask for attention. He finds none. He tightens the bilge hoop with a driver rhythm his father used to quick, one slow. Listen. Sleep one heartbeat, one more. He plugs the bung loosely with a soft, wet rag to keep air polite until the next packing. He stacks the cask on its side so it can be rolled with a shoulder and a hand and not ask for a back to do more than its share. A clock in the corner of the office says a time the room believes. The weigher adds up a page and checks totals with a finger, because fingers arrive before machines and will leave after, and neither minds the other's company if the numbers match. He blots with a piece of old sail, leans back so the chair's back will remember him tomorrow, and smooths a corner that tried to turn up and pretend to be less than paper. Toward evening, a ketch warps from the wall to the outer posts. Men lay a gangplank and roll 2 casks at a time with bar in hand, heel and hip, walking the heads into a pyramid in the hold. A wedge block keeps the stack from taking ideas from waves. A man on the deck chalks a tally on a board and calls down numbers with a steady set of words that do not expect applause. Down below passes the chalk back at the right times, so noses will not forget what they're counting. If you go soft here, the chalk will still say its short words, and the casks will still nest in good order, and the ketch will still lean as the tide happens to it without asking anyone's leave. A sign by the door shows prices in marks and ore. It is not a threat. It is a way of keeping questions from crowding work. Under it hangs a broom. The packer takes it at dusk and sweeps the floor to a tidy. Salt scrapes into a bean for tomorrow. Bits of scale go to the bucket under the counter to be carried out where cats can hold a meeting and pretend they aren't grateful. He lifts the broom to its nail so bristles will not bend their lives away overnight. At the cooper's bench, last task, a water test for a cap. He fills a small cask half with clean, rolls it, listens, then pours. The water comes out as water. He dries the inside with a rag on a stick. The rag is always clean, because clean rags make fewer jobs tomorrow. He smokes the inside for a minute with a chip of oak, so the wood will remember a good smell before salt teaches it another. He sets the cask with its mates and turns the light low. Outside, the key scale stands still. A line of goals practices not dropping anything at all for 10 long seconds, which is their finest work. The ketch's wake rubs the wool rope, hums a string you can only hear when you stop trying to. The packers rinse hands in a barrel, water turning from clear to silver, and then pour it where it will not offend. The cooper takes a chip from the day's shaving pile and presses it in his pocket, because pockets like tokens from work. They want to meet again tomorrow. Night leans over the harbour, and the salt shed breathes out a little cool. Lamplight in the window marks somebody bent over a list. Farther down, a boy runs his hand along the smooth bilge of a cask and thinks about how something round can be steady if you respect it and set wedges where wedges belong. He does not say this out loud. He will remember it when he needs it. Maybe next year. Maybe in a town that keeps its water in a different shape. Morning will ask for more of the same. Staves will rise in a ring rope, will lift a hoop salt, will fall from a scoop fish, will lie head to tail and teach order to anyone who wants to learn without being told. The key scale will listen for each weight and keep none of them. The ketch will go at dawn with the tide and return with something else in a month. Work that makes food travel safely is not loud, but fills a country in ways that gossip never could.